Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 126 of Through the Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. My name is Trevor Dane, joined as always by the co-manager of this establishment, Matt Feuerstein. And Matt, we're doing something crazy, insane today. I don't know if we've ever done this, a Tuesday night record.
Yeah, well, over the past week or so, the whole online wrestling scene that I follow has been immersed in this whole WrestleMania weekend deal-em-a-bob. And what was I doing while everyone was watching all these WrestleMania weekend shows? While I was watching and taking notes on the least memorable Ring of Honor show of all time. It's funny. I will talk about what the quality of the show itself, because I don't want to sound too negative, but because I'm not. But I do classify it that way for myself, at least, because during 2005 and through 2008, I went to a lot of Ring of Honor shows, including the one that we're going to review tonight. And I can say with confidence, I remembered less about this show than any other show I went to. Like, I could not remember a thing about the show besides the main event. And I can't say the same for any of the, I was thinking back to, like, every other show that I went to during this era, I remember more. So for me, this is the least memorable Ring of Honor show ever, at least until I watched it. Now we'll find out if I still feel that way.
And isn't it crazy how times change? Like, back then you were such a huge dyed-in-the-wool Ring of Honor fan. I imagine you were going to most shows, like, within distance of you, that were reasonable. And then, like, the weekend that we're talking, like, that just happened as we record this, you had a ticket to go see Ring of Honor when they only run, like, 3 pay-per-views a year now, and you decide, I got stuff to do. And Matt, did you ever, you had me share your tweet. Like, did you ever give for those who don't know, Matt actually was very generous saying, hey, since I'm not going, could you help boost this? I'm willing just to give this ticket away for free. Did anyone end up taking you up on that offer and getting a free ticket to the show?
Nope.
Aw.
Nobody wanted one. At least nobody that saw those tweets. Yeah, I mean, that show ended up being a good show. But yeah, I mean, also it's just, I mean, part of it was the lineup itself, but and I thought, it's not like it was terrible or anything, but I'm just in a different place in life. I'm 40 and had a long work week, and I was looking and saw that altogether with rush hour traffic probably would have been about 3 hours going, and on the way back probably no traffic since it would have been late, maybe like an hour and a half to 2 hours the way back. So you're talking about like a 5 hours total in the car on a Friday night after a long week of work. And, for me to do that at this point, it's got to be something, really, really spectacular. And yeah, I probably wouldn't have done a travel for, let's say, the lineup of Black Friday Fallout, for example. Although
you're like, oh.
Although there were some matches that looked good on paper here, and we'll find out if they were good.
Yeah. You're like the equivalent of a wrestler, which is you've reached middle age and your bump card is getting you can't just splurge on everything now. You have to kind of save your attendances now.
Yeah, if Supercard of Honor was on a Saturday, I almost definitely would have gone. Let's put it that way.
Well, before we get to the show today, we always cover on Through the Years what happened in the Ring of Honor timeline between the last show we covered and this one. Lately, the pickings have been bare. Matt, I've got a bushel of different little tidbits and a fun little exercise. Not even an exercise, just a fun little thing to visit. But
are you gonna quiz me on something?
No, I'm not actually. But I am going to.
I was hoping for a big time, a mini version of the 5-star match game with Trevor.
Well, you know what?
Matt.
You know what? This thing could be turned into a quiz just for you. I'm going to turn it into a quiz.
Yeah.
But first...
That's my quiz sound.
I wasn't expecting you to draw that out, those extra 3 seconds.
I do that behind the scenes on every 5-star match game. I go, ooh, yeah. And that's why Joe doesn't want to have me on anymore.
Oh, God. We got to quit talking about it because he's like goddamn Beetlejuice. So we keep talking about we're going to will another one into existence. So So first we'll go to the Pro Wrestling Torch, which they reported on this thing at the time, which I thought was interesting for a couple of reasons. The Torch wrote, regarding the oft-asked question of why Ring of Honor hasn't pursued a local or national TV deal, Gabe Sapolsky tells Pro Wrestling Torch that the DVD marketing business has allowed ROH to be financially stable, and he would have to give up a measure of control to a TV network to fit programming into a time slot. He said ROH answers to no one except the fan base, which allows him to build the product around the core talent without worrying about what content or wrestlers, such as big names from the past, a TV network would want to see. Now, first reason I like that, of course, is any long-time through the years listener knows I love documenting the 39 times now probably we have found them saying, Ring of Honor is self-sustaining, the DVD, and then every time eventually you find out, like from, everyone after the fact, during the Rob Feinstein scandal, like, this company was like never a big money maker, but they were constantly telling you, it's self-sustaining, blah, blah, blah. But I thought it was also interesting because we're not that long away now, just in the Ring of Honor timeline at this point, just a few months away from when they announced, like, we're going to pay-per-view. And if I remember correctly, this might have been from the Lenny Leonard episode of Between the Sheets, one of the episodes he did. I think he did multiple ones, but there's one who he goes into the Man Up pay-per-view. It's a great episode. And I think it's on that episode he mentioned, like, one of the main reasons they tried to pivot to pay-per-view was, like, an attempt to grow the audience, because they were acknowledging that, like, the DVD market is, if anything, going to shrink. It's not going to get bigger. But it's interesting that we're just a few months from that, and Gabe's like, DVD model's fine. We wouldn't even want to go on TV. And then, 2 years after this, they're going to be on TV. So
yeah, I mean, I could see Gabe being honest about him not wanting to go on TV and deal with the demands of like a network, but I can't see Kerry Silkin sharing that thought. Like I just he wanted to. I mean, he owned the business. I'm sure he wanted it to make money and wanted it to get bigger. Like I don't know. Everything that I would say would be complete speculation, but knowing what we know now in hindsight and knowing what Kerry ends up doing in a few months with the pay-per-view thing against Gabe's wishes, right? Didn't he say that he wasn't in favor of what they ended up doing with the pay-per-views?
yeah, I mean, I'm 100% sure, but it screwed up the timeline because shows then aired out of order, so it made the booking more complicated for him.
Yeah.
So I'm sure from like that aspect, I mean, I can always sympathize with someone that hates change, man.
Yeah, but like Gabe at this point was just sort of like the auteur, like he was like, let me have my vision. So I'm sure, I would guess that in his mind, having that sort of freedom of just we're going to do our own thing and sell directly to the consumer was probably more up his alley than the idea of getting a TV show and having to have those like network masters and needs of growth that you would want with a TV. I mean, I'm sure he saw what TNA was having to deal with at that point, and he didn't have to deal with any of that. And that's probably part of why ROH was so much better than TNA a lot of the time during this era.
And the other thing to point out is this Torch article I just read says why ROH hasn't pursued a local or national TV deal. It is worth pointing out that in the first year of Ring of Honor, they did briefly have a local TV deal in Philadelphia that
right, but like
obviously didn't go great.
Super small. Like it was a very non-ambitious TV show that they put on. Right, it was just mostly like highlights and then like almost like an AEW Dark kind of match listing.
If I remember correctly, they stopped doing it because they discovered like this is making no impact on our DVD sales. So what's the point?
Right.
And that'll bring us next to my I debuted this segment a couple shows ago. I thought there might be huge pickings. No, this is pretty slim pickings. Down to the wire, where I cover anything notable that happened in the video wires between the last show and this show. I'm doing it a bit early here because it kind of dovetails into another story. So there was only one thing in the video wires between the last show and this show that was really notable, and I'll just read my recap of it. Roderick Strong hosted one of the video wires because they were always having at this point guest hosts, and Roderick Strong, a big test for him with his battle with charisma at this point in his career. And so at this point, Roddy hosts the Video Wire, and the big news of it is he's fresh off beating Bryan Danielson for the FIP title down in Florida in a title versus FIP career match. And then Roddy says, I'm going to start defending the FIP title in ROH. He says, I know people could care less about this belt, which I thought, well, that's shockingly honest. But he says, I'm going to make you care about it because I'm going to have the best matches on the shows. I'm going to defend the title against the best in the world. So, he's basically saying, I'm going to turn this into like a workhorse style, mid-card title. And he goes, in fact, since I'm the champion, we're going to change the rules to the FIP title matches. And he announces what the new rules are. He says there's going to be a 20 count on the floor, and the title can change hands via count out or disqualification. So Roddy has to beat his opponent to the middle of the ring. And I thought this was just really kind of funny because that is basically the pure title rules minus the rope breaks and I guess the closed fist punches. Like, so yeah, we are, and we'll go to the PW Torch next, where the Torch would write, since the FIP title is coming to ROH, there will be more consistency between FIP and ROH storylines. FIP will now feature unique talent that won't be seen in ROH, as FIP has added several new wrestlers such as Larry Sweeney, Hallow Wicked, Grant Akuma, and Eddie Kingston to its roster. There will still be a core of ROH talent such as Roderick Strong, Davey Richards, and the Briscoes at most FIP events. So,
well, Larry Sweeney would be a regular in ROH like within a month, for one thing. Although not as a wrestler, to be fair. Did he wrestle in FIP during this period, or was he just a manager?
I think he might have wrestled. I can try and look that up quick. But the other thing is, were you going to say anything else there?
No.
I was just going to say, it's interesting that, we've talked about before, Gabe was very much a proponent of the, being under the tutelage of Paul Heyman. The Paul Heyman school of thought of, you kind of shy away from mid-card titles, and if you do have a mid-card or a secondary title, if you do have a secondary title, it's actually not a mid-card title. You kind of try and make it almost like a 1B title. ECW kind of did that with the FTW title, the TV title during Rob Van Dam's reign, and he always tried to do that, I feel like, with the to at least a little bit of a degree with the pure title, but it never really worked out. But the FIP title is going to be like the one time in Ring of Honor, I feel like, where you have a title where I don't think he even really attempts to make it like the 1B. And so it's interesting that he's bringing it in. Like, is it just for promotion of FIP, or is it because he feels like now there is kind of a void where I would like to have like a second singles title to promote on the shows, even though we just did away with the pure title? I'm not sure.
I feel like it was mostly to promote FIP, and then maybe to make like certain wrestlers' matches seem a little more important sometimes. I'm thinking like throughout 2007, there are definitely some FIP title matches for sure, and into 2008, but I don't know that it's consistently used as a major match on ROH shows. I guess I'll see if my memory was right or wrong, but I remember just sort of being sporadically placed as opposed to being a consistent secondary title in the promotion.
So I just looked up Larry Sweeney in FIP. He has 3 matches in FIP for the remainder of 2006, and then he has 11 in FIP in 2007. So actually, yeah, he is just a regular
wrestler,
worker in FIP. And even like he gets a world title match with Roderick Strong that goes almost 17 minutes. So like he's put it in there. The other thing I thought that was interesting that these stories brought up was I don't remember where I heard this. I think I'm like 80% sure I read this recently when I was digging up some old Gabe Sapolsky MySpace blogs, which are like hard to find. You can't find the complete collection of them, but anyone has the absolute complete collection, not just the things you can find at Wayback Machine, through the years at gmail.com. I would love to have those because there's a couple things coming up that I think I could get some juicy tidbits for. I actually just realized as I was saying I hate the phrase juicy tidbits, so I'm never going to say that again.
You love it.
But something that came up was, so Matt, you remember that show in 2006 ROH where Bryan Danielson showed up right after he won the FIP world title, and they did like an FIP segment interview on an ROH show where he was like at a little set or like in the back of the building with Dave Prazak, and he had the FIP title, and he got into like a crowd brawl with Roderick or something.
I do.
And he had both titles then, and it was like, then you never see an ROH Bryan with the FIP title again. And it turns out there's a reason for that, because I think Gabe in one of these blogs points out, like, one of his ideas when he had Bryan win the FIP title was to be able to promote Bryan as a double champion. You know, he could go into ROH or anywhere with 2 titles, and they could really, you know, not just Bryan's having this great reign as ROH champion, but he's actually like a double champion in 2 companies. And apparently Bryan, why that didn't happen was Bryan basically told Gabe, I really don't like carrying around 2 belts everywhere I go. So this is annoying, so I don't want to do it. And that put a stop to that, basically.
That is a juicy tidbit as part of Trevor's new every episode segment, Trevor Dame's Juicy Tidbit of the Week. And by the way, Trevor, I will be trying to say juicy tidbits many times on this episode, just so you know.
I rue the day you asked me to do this podcast, Matt. I can't speak today. This is what happens when we record on a Tuesday. You know, normally Tuesday's one of the days I let myself eat whatever I want. Normally I try and eat clean most of the week, so I'm hopped up on sugar, Matt. I'm energetic for this episode, but I'm also jittery. So see if you can hear that in my performance, dear listeners.
See, now that was a juicy tidbit about your life.
You know, this episode is sponsored by the Kirkland brand from Costco, dark chocolate covered dehydrated mango. Very recommended.
I thought you were going to say there was like a gum called Juicy Tidbits that it was sponsored by.
This might be Matt. You know, the quality of this episode, like the show we are covering today, isn't good. You're testing the future of this show by going to the juicy tidbit. Well, you are poking the bear, my friend.
I haven't said anything about the quality of the show we're reviewing yet, other than I really found it forgettable until I watched it tonight, or not tonight, but you know, in the weeks leading up to tonight.
So Matt, then we're coming to the thing I can triviafy for you. This is from the PW Insider, although really it's from the Ring of Our website, but they had a nice reference to this. They wrote on PWInsider.com, the ROH fan base held a poll on the ROH message board to determine the top 100 Ring of Honor belts for the company's first 100 live events. The winning match was, I won't say it. Looking over the list, it's pretty amazing what a body of work the company has put together in under 5 years. I dug up, with the help of the Wayback Machine, the list. I only copy and pasted the top 20 matches. I'm only going to – so to triviafy this, I'm going to do just top 10. I am going to ask you, Matt, how many of the top 10 can you name? And remember, this is from the first 100 shows, so it doesn't include anything past the 100th show. And if you can name – if you want to go even for bonus points, if you can name, you know, what do you think was the number 1 match? What was the number 2? Obviously, I don't think you're going to want to go more granular than that. But, you know, how many of the top 10 do you think you could name of what this big, large fan vote was?
7.
Okay. Matt, name those 7.
All right. Joe versus Punk 2?
Yes.
Joe versus Punk 3?
Yes.
Joe versus Kobashi?
Yes.
That's 3, right? Dragon Gate 6-man?
Yes.
Okay, let's see. The Era of Honor Begins 3-way?
No.
Oh, wow. But this isn't List Them and Learn, so I am not eliminated yet.
No,
right?
you can keep going.
I get some strikes.
We're friendly here.
Yes. What about the Epic Encounter? London versus Danielson?
No.
So now I have to wonder, does the list just skew newer? The main event of the 100th show?
Yes.
Okay.
You're up to 5.
Yeah. All right, this is fun. Danielson versus Roderick Strong from Vendetta?
Yes. You're up to 6.
Yeah, so it just skews it skews with a recency bias. That's what I'm getting out of this. All right. What would the 7th be? That's pretty tough. Low Key versus Kenta?
Yes, you got 7, Matt. You did surprisingly well. I mean, do you want to try and keep going? We can give you a few more guesses. You've got 3 left in the top 10.
Okay. I'll try. Yeah. I'd say if I get 5 wrong, let's cut it out. But
Okay.
not cut it out. I just mean like cut it off.
Do you want me to give you a minor clue?
Not yet.
Okay, good.
Um, okay. I'm trying to think to 2005 because I know there had not been any Danielson versus McGuinness matches yet. Oh boy. And I'm guessing that there weren't okay. I'm gonna guess something that I don't think is right, but I would definitely have had it at this point. Samoa Joe versus Jay Briscoe from All at Our Best.
No,
Yeah. Joe versus Punk from the World Title Classic.
no,
Joe versus Aries from Final Battle.
no. I'm going to give you two more guesses.
Not the match where Gibson won the title from in the four-way.
No.
All right, so this is my last guess. Yeah, because I
I think
think
this is pretty amazing. By the way, you are an excellent self-handicapper because you were like, I can do 7, and you did like shockingly quick run to 7, and now you have immediately, once you got to 7, hit a brick wall. So like you
yeah,
perfectly handicapped yourself.
yeah. So let me ask you this before I do my last guess. Do you find the other 3 suitable members of this list?
There is one that's a little bit of a huh?
Head scratcher?
Like not a complete head scratcher, but I definitely would be like, I can't believe they went there. If I was going to give another hint, I will say, and I'm not even going to give you another hint.
I just I want to say like Homicide versus Carino, but I just think that was too early in ROH, the really good one. If they're not even putting London and Danielson in the main event of the first show on the list, then I can't imagine they're going to put that one. It's got to be something from '04 or '05. And it doesn't seem like there's going to be anything else from '04. So I got to think of what else could have been during that time. I can't imagine this is right, but I'm just gonna guess. Steel Cage Warfare.
No.
All right. Well, I'm
So
glad
I
that's
will
on
read
this.
off. I will read off the top 10 from 10 counting down.
Well, actually, before you do that, let me just say I think Joe versus Punk 2 is number 1. That's my guess.
Okay, well, I will save that as we do the countdown. Give
Okay.
you even more drama. Joe
Yes.
Gagney, I can do your job. See, it's easy. Number 10, and you, by the way, great. It was also really fun hearing you figure out within a few of your correct guesses, there is, as you read this list, there is a major recency bias, but I will say 2 of the 3 matches you missed were older matches. So maybe that also was a bit trickier.
Makes sense.
So number 10 was the Team ROH versus Team CZW match from the 100th show. So that's a great match, but I would also imagine this is a review of the first 100 shows. That's some pretty big recency bias as well. Number 9 was the one I would describe as the head scratcher. 9th best match in ROH history up to this point, the fans voted. AJ Styles versus Paul London from Night of the Grudges.
Wow.
I think it's a real good match.
More than Epic Encounter. Wow.
More than Epic Encounter, more than Carino and Homicide from Bitter Friends, more than the 3-way from Era of Honor Begins, which finished 11th, by the way. Danielson London from Epic Encounter finished 12th. More than Joe and Aries in Final Battle 2004, which finished 18th. More than Homicide and Carino from Bitter Friends, which finished 19th. The Joe Briscoe's cage match finished 20th. So, that's to me, it's wow, people like that. Maybe just because Paul London is not remembered as much because he's never really got his big prominent run the way so many of his contemporaries did. But that match is not remembered the way any of these other matches I would say is remembered on this list. But number 8 was another one of the ones you missed. Samoa Joe versus Bryan Danielson from Midnight Express Reunion.
See, I thought about it. I just thought it wouldn't. I don't know. I just didn't think that it would get named ahead of all those other matches that I mentioned.
And then 7 and 6, this was an interesting one. I could see why this would be real easy for you to miss. You got one of the Danielson-Roderick matches. 7 is Danielson versus Roderick from Supercut of Honor. 6 is Danielson versus Roderick from Vendetta. So they both made it.
Gotcha. Okay.
Then
I wouldn't argue with it necessarily.
5 is Joe versus Punk 3 from All-Star Extravaganza 2. 4 is Low Key versus Kenta. So that's a real high placement for that. Again, maybe recency bias because you wouldn't have been that many months removed from it if you were voting after the 100th show. 3 is the Dragon Gate 6-man for Supercard of Honor. 2 is Joe Punk 2.
All right.
Number 1 was Joe versus Kobashi.
I knew it was one of them. I thought
Yeah.
maybe that Joe Punk 2 would get the nod just because it's a pure ROH wrestler match, for the ROH title. So I thought they would get sort of that sentimental aspect would bump it ahead of Joe versus Kobashi. But I knew those were going to be the top two. Like I especially at the timing of the way when the list came out. And speaking of the Dragon Gate 6-man and like sentimentality, you know, we're a little bit ways away from having to do our end of 2006 lists, but that's going to be a tough one for me because obviously it's the match that won Match of the Year and the Observer and stuff, but like I sort of don't totally see it as a pure ROH match. And like, is it fair to rank against other ROH matches that have actual ROH wrestlers in it? It's a question that I'm currently wrestling with.
It's tough. I got some it's going to be hard for me this year, but for some different reasons. Maybe I'll save those reasons when we get to the year-end episode. But going back, we got just a couple more juicy news tidbits, Matt. I'm doing it for you, buddy. Don't say I don't make sacrifices for the show. And I say these for the end because these kind of pertain to tonight's episode. The first is from the Observer WWE section. Dave Meltzer would report at this time, Claudio Castagnoli has signed his WWE developmental contract and should be starting around the first of the year. This leaves ROH with about 6 weeks to change the tag team titles. So
boy, we remember this saga pretty well, I would say.
Yeah. We'll talk more about the end of the saga, I guess maybe around Final Battle. Might be the only time in Through the Years history where we will heavily reference an interview that occurred on the Lillian Garcia podcast, because that's like the best source for like what the hell happened in that story, which is still not a great like explanation.
I don't even think I know about that. I don't even think I knew that was a podcast.
I don't know if it still is, but like I was searching for a while ago for like, did Claudio ever like figure out what happened? The answer is kind of no, but like the most clear statement he's given about it was a few years ago on Lillian Garcia had a podcast. So like, so yeah, that's something to keep in mind is like at this time, everyone kind of thought, oh, Claudio's on his way out, but dear listener, spoiler, he would not be. And then finally we go to the Observer, Pro Wrestling Noah News section. Dave would write, Bryan Danielson debuts with this group and will be working the entire tour from November 17th to December 2nd, which is going to be a killer on him and his bad shoulder. Noah aired Danielson's win in ROH over Kenta to build up his debut, so they're going to be expecting high-quality stuff from him. Also on the tour is Bison Smith, Doug Williams, Wade Chisholm, and Eddie Edwards, a New England-based independent wrestler who is a good junior heavyweight and has done well here before. So,
but Wade Chisholm is a name I have not thought about in many, many, many years.
Yeah, Dave, in fact, notes when he writes about Wade Chisholm, he goes, he wrestles for Harley Race's WLW promotion and did a singles match with Kenta Kobashi in 2005 in Eldon, Montana, or is that Missouri? I always mix up those.
Right, he was the one other person to have a singles match with Kenta Kobashi in the United States besides Samoa Joe. Wade Chisholm.
That is like a great bit of wrestling trivia.
Yeah, it's quite a distinction, honestly.
Yeah, like people sometimes don't. I think a lot of people don't remember. They just remember, oh, Kobashi came to ROH for a double shot. They don't remember like he went early, I think, to like work with Harley Race's promotion, because I think Harley Race's promotion had a bit of a working agreement with Noah maybe, and the Wade Chisholm got to wrestle Kenta Kobashi. So yeah, that dovetails us into show, which will be this might be the only double shot during Bryan's title reign, other than right after he won the title, he famously actually missed the Kobashi double shot because he had to go to his sister's wedding. But after that, I don't think he misses any other shows during his year plus title reign except this double shot. And boy, at least on this night, we could have used some Bryan Danielson, even an injured working through it, Bryan Danielson. But I mean, that shows how strong the Noah partnership was and how important it was for guys to work there, where Bryan would leave for an extended tour. Even when his shoulder was completely thrashed, he would actually return the loss to Kenta that Kenta did for him in ROH on this tour. So yeah, he's out for this weekend. And night one of this weekend is Black Friday Fallout, which might be the worst show name in Ring of Honor history. Friday Fallout.
It has a lot of competition, I would say, Trevor.
It took place November 24th, 2006, at the Sports Plus Entertainment Center in Lake Grove, New York, in front of a reported crowd of 600 fans. There were 3 pre-show matches. I defined the results from Johnny Nitro of the ROH Live Journal community way back when. I have to presume this is not the actual Johnny Nitro. First one was Mitch Franklin pinned Alex Payne. Second one was Bobby Dempsey pinned Ernie Osiris, and Johnny Nitro wrote in his notes, "Short but okay. Dempsey chopped the hell out of the poor victim, who I must say looked nervous as hell out there. Obnoxious Rude section chanted, 'Go away,' and 'We don't know you.'" So that sucks.
Sounds like a Long Island crowd to me.
Yeah, and then finally your pre-show main event was Shane Hagedorn retained the top of the class trophy, defeating Red Titus.
Thank you for those juicy tidbits about what happened in the dark matches.
Exactly, and those you won't find those at Cage Match. I had to hunt those down for you, dear listener. So the work I do for you, that took me at least 3 to 4 minutes. We open backstage with the Kings of Wrestling in front of a very low-rent makeshift podium. When Hero introduces themselves, we hear a bunch of boos from an unseen crowd behind the camera, which clearly the wrestlers and Gabe. Claudio says you better get used to them saying whatever they want, wherever they want. Hero references Christopher Daniels and Matt Sydal and how they're coming after the Kings of Wrestling. That gets cheers from the crowd. The same thing happens when Claudio name drops Aries and Strong, and Hero mentions the Briscoes. The crowd goes like, "Yay!" Hero says it doesn't matter that if the Briscoes haven't even earned a tag title shot, they'll give one to them. They're fighting champions. Hero says the internal bleeding Austin Aries suffered the last time they wrestled each other is going to be child's play compared to tonight in their no DQ rematch. This was not particularly a good promo. It was basically only there to remind you of who the Kings of Wrestling's challengers were and maybe to give some misdirection that like, oh, they're going to have a Briscoes match coming up when like, no, they're about to drop the titles before this weekend is over. But I will say I do appreciate any promo that tries to be a little different and any promo that tries to like use a prop backstage. Like we just saw the Christopher Daniels chalkboard promo. Like anytime you can do that in indie wrestling, I appreciate it.
I will say this, though, about this. It's funny because ROH is sort of a very self-serious promotion, but this was clearly like a tongue-in-cheek comedy segment, right? Like the reactions from the press, so over the top. First of all, at a press conference, you wouldn't get those reactions, right? Those are like reactions of fans, not the press. So, like, it's sort of like...
Matt, you don't watch some of these WWE press conferences. That it is closer to reality than it's ever been.
Okay, yes, true. But like at the time, there weren't wrestling press conferences like that, and you would get it was sort of mocking like a sports press conference. And while I don't watch those either, I don't think that the reporters cheer and boo during the press conferences. Tell me if I'm wrong.
No, yeah. not in the sports I would consider legitimate. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was sort of like an amalgamation of like a promo plus a press conference. Anyway, point is it was silly. And so it kind of didn't fit the tone of ROH, but it was fine nevertheless.
We then join Brent Albright backstage. He tells us that his name is Brent Albright. He says he's found a brand new home here in ROH. He's here tonight for 2 reasons: to make money and beat people up. Tonight he's hit the jackpot because he doesn't get to beat up just one person. He gets to beat up 5 Ring of Honor superstars in a gauntlet match. Then he says his get out or tap out catchphrase. Brent Albright telegraphing is going to be number 1, exposing the business or at least giving away the entrance order.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was like, wait, his math means that he has to start the thing or else he's not going to be fighting 5 different people.
And that brings us to the opening match of the main card, the first match we get to see as the DVD buying public. The 4-corner survival match. Lacey defeated Allison Danger, Daisy Hayes, and the debuting Nikki Rocks in 8:28 when she pinned Rocks after hitting the implant DDT. So these were basically the 3 mainstay manager/wrestler women in ROH plus Nikki Rocks. Nikki Rocks would be best known for she worked pretty heavily in Shimmer for a time, but she would be best known, Matt, as the Voodoo Queen, Roxy Laveau in TNA, part of the Voodoo Kin Mafia, and I think she just stuck around in TNA for a while after that. Voodoo Lady, Matt, shaking that stick, driving me crazy. That's a music reference. What'd you think about this match?
So how many different permutations of Lacey versus Allison Danger versus Daisy Hayes versus guest star have there been at this point?
Gotta be at least 3 to 4, which is a lot considering that Ring of Honor didn't often do women's wrestling. But I mean, it's easy for them, obviously, because a lot of times those first 3 women in the match, they just get booked as managers to begin with. So you can get a
Yeah.
tag or a 4-way just by splurging and grabbing one extra female wrestler.
Right. It's more if you add like the times they did a couple of like 6-ways and stuff, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot. It's almost like it's SNL. Like they just have a new guest. They do have a new host with the regular not ready for primetime players.
I
Although
would love if they had like Dawn Parr, like Lorraine Newman, and she came out. Well, Lorraine Newman in Ring of Honor.
yes.
Would love it. Love to see it.
Although I think Lacey was actually kind of ready for primetime at this point. But for one thing, so Lacey doesn't have the Yeah Yeah Yeahs music. She has like this new metal theme, which I do not think fits her persona very well.
Yeah, it's like Disturbed or something. She's supposed to be like the rich, classy girl, and she's coming out to Disturbed. Like, come on.
Yeah, I agree. First of all, as I mentioned last time, it was sort of refreshing to have Gabe on commentary here. I don't know. I'm weird. I enjoy him on commentary a lot of the time. And one very funny part about Gabe on commentary is he makes this weird comment very early about how respectful he's being because he watched the Survivor Series 87 and didn't hear one snide comment from the announcers. And I have to think like Prazak, who's running Shimmer at this point, is thinking like, what the fuck are you talking about, Gabe? But Prazak in response just says, oh, how times change. And then Gabe immediately undercuts his respectfulness by saying, Judy Martin and Leilani Kai are no Lacey and Alice in Danger. And I know that he was not talking about their wrestling ability. So Gabe is going to be Gabe in 2006, I guess. But
well, especially because Judy Martin is like he better not have been talking about their wrestling ability because Judy Martin is like one of the underrated WWF workers of the 80s. Like she was a very good wrestler, especially in an underserved women's division and those matches with the Glamour Girls and Jumping Bomb Angels. Like so for him being like it's a no-win scenario because if he's saying Judy Martin and Leilani Kai like don't look as good as Lacey and Alice in Danger, that's like sex, like kind of just degrading. And if he's saying she's not as good of a wrestler, it's like that's also shitty, but also not true. I would say like Judy Martin, very like probably the best women's wrestler of anyone in this match or the 2 he referenced there.
Yeah, so hey, but see why it's refreshing, Trevor. We get to make fun of some weird commentary for the first time in a while. So you don't get that with Dave Prazak. You know what I mean? Not as much.
I guess we should mention that we mentioned on the last show, MSL, Mr. St. Laurent, aka his working name of Jared David. He's gone from ROH commentary. I didn't find out why, like legitimately he left, but it was interesting that so Gabe's going to be doing commentary for this show and 3 more after it until Lenny Leonard finally comes back. But it's interesting that Prazak says Jared David is on the shelf, hospitalized due to an allergic reaction to some medication he's been taking. Hopefully he'll be back soon. And then Gabe says Jared has some tubes in him in the hospital and should be back soon. I thought is this a real story? Because this is oddly specific. And they were acting like he's going to come back. He never does.
But like, boy, if that's true, boy, what a cursed position that second commentary mic is in ROH in 2006, that both Lenny Leonard and Jared David had like serious medical problems happen to them in the span of like 6 months. Like, yeesh. So I hope it's not true. But either way, we got some Gabe here. The match, you wouldn't expect the crowd to be hot for it, and it wasn't. They moved pretty quickly, which is appreciated. They're not dragging it out. Do some of their big moves. Danger goes for the stretch plum on Lacey, and Hayes drop kicks her from behind. And then, they tag out to Hayes and Rox, and Hayes tries to attack Lacey, but Rox cuts her off and hits a tilt-a-whirl backbreaker. The story of the match is mainly that Daisy Hayes wants at Lacey. Lacey is avoiding her. Just a classic wrestling story, because if you remember a couple shows before, Lacey, for basically no reason, came out and made fun of Daisy Hayes, called her a loser, and hit her. And so now Hayes is coming for revenge. So they set up basically Hayes as the top women's baby face and Lacey as the top women's heel. Um, and that's really a lot of the match. Eventually, uh, Hayes hits Knox with rocks. Excuse me. My notes are crazy. Hayes hits Nikki Rocks. I think I just like put the two names together in sort of a portmanteau and called it Knox. Um, with the heart punch, and then Lacey blind tagged herself in off of Hayes and hit Rocks with the implant DDT to steal the win. Um, I didn't think this match was bad or anything. Like all things considered, I thought it didn't really feel like it flowed. But I do think that the execution was a little better than in some of the other matches, and it did have an intra-match story of Lacey being scared of Daisy and sneaking the win. So not bad overall. I didn't think it was ever boring. But, you compare it to one of the last times you had this four-way version, and instead of Nikki Rocks, it was Mercedes Martinez, and that match was like super good, and Mercedes Martinez was a standout and got super over, and then they are barely booking her, and I'm still very confused as to why. And so this match was nothing like that. This was much more of the boilerplate, like what you expect from ROH women's match. Whereas that one was a breath of fresh air and really, really good. So I would say this was a disappointment while also not being that bad, I guess is what I would say.
I like this a little less than you. I felt like this match was kind of the norm for the ROH women when at this time, which was a very scrambly match, usually either a tag or a four-way, and very scrambly. I mean that by like every sense of the word, very scrambly, and like the style's kind of like a scramble, but also it's just scrambly. Like I thought there was some roughness in the execution here. Like there was at least one spot where it looked like someone came off the ropes and her opponent clearly did not know what the other was about to do. There was like a big mistimed breakup of a pin. There was just some hitchiness in some of the moves. And the flow was another one of those matches that was kind of weird where it starts at a fairly fast pace and then it kind of dips a little, I felt, as it went on rather than pick up. And yeah, so like we said before, in this match, you have the three mainstays of the company and Nikki Rocks. And like you said, they did the story of three baby faces and then Lacey being the heel, doing the heel tricks, avoiding Daisy Hayes because they're feuding and she's scared until she steals the win at the end. And I guess that's the other thing to bring up is Daisy Hayes, now that she's out of the embassy, with no real turn angle, just in back to full baby face mode, like hand slapping fans in the front row, like totally all the way back. I thought Nikki Rocks completely fit in with the other three. She had a couple cool moves, including like a sequence of cradles that just kept rolling through with Allison Danger that I thought was the highlight of the match. And she also came out to E-Pro by Beck, which I didn't realize until I heard it there. I was like, this is the most mid-aughts theme music you could possibly have, because it was like the first time in my life hearing this as I rewatched it this last week that the mid-aughts felt dated to me. I was like, man, that song, is that like 100 years old? No, wait, less than 20? Oh, okay.
This is the first time the mid-aughts felt dated to you?
Yeah, Matt, I'm living in the mid-aughts in my mind, man. That's my heyday. So this is the first time I was like, man, there really is some distance emotionally, chronologically. It's not a good way for me. And yeah, we got the Gabe's commentary, which, there are different phases of Gabe's commentary towards women. I would describe them as the sexist and degrading era, the overly patronizing era, and now we are we're in the more modern era, which is the patting yourselves on the back like you hit a home run for booking these women when you're barely getting to first base era, which is just like, boy, we know how to do it right. Boy, this is better than women from the past. Boy, but you know what? As I always say when this stuff happens, Ring of Honor showed improvement over the first few years in their treatment of women, glacially paced, very incremental improvement. But if you go back to the things we talked about with women the first couple of years of Ring of Honor, this is an improvement.
True. But like, would it have improved at all if it wasn't for Dave Prazak? Who knows?
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing. Dave Prazak does not have that influence, a huge booster, the guy behind Shimmer, to the point where these women's matches now are now basically being usually sold with Dave on commentary as Shimmer offer matches, not like, oh, these are like, oh, Shimmer's bringing this to us. After the match, Daisy says to the camera, Lacey, you better watch yourself because this is going to be the last time you ever fuck with me. So Daisy Hayes swearing like The Rock lately. The Rock loving the F-bombs lately. He's a new man, Matt. But
New
we
fucking
return
man.
back. We return backstage to find Homicide and Julius Smokes. The latter's holding a cigar, or is it a blunt? We'll never know. I don't know if there's a visual cue. I am not cool, Matt. I don't smoke all off the pot. But Homicide says Steve Corino is out of this company and maybe his life. So I like the idea that maybe Corino will show up outside of wrestling. He calls Jim Cornette a little douche, but he pronounces it as little dush. So I like the Homicide reveals he's only read douche before and never heard it apparently. He adds that.
See, I don't even think I picked up that he meant douche. Like I was just like, I was like, should I know that term? A dush? Like
for a half second, I was like, did he call him Little Dutch? But I was like, no, that has to be him trying to say little douche. So yeah, Homicide adds, Corino's gone from the company. I mean, Cornette's gone from the company too. Homicide now says, now that Corino's gone, now that Cornette's gone, the Briscoes are next. And tomorrow, he and Samoa Joe are going to do a 187 on them. Homicide says Adam Pearce is talking about a strap match lately, and he says, when Pearce was 3 or 4, he was getting spanked by his mom and his dad. And he says, in Chicago, I'm going to be your pops, and I'm going to give you a beating there. Homicide asks Smokes who he faces tonight. Smokes tells him Jimmy Rave. Homicide laughs at that and says, Nana's gone back to Africa. I'm going to put the hurt on Rave. Smokes sings a little, so... Yeah, teasing an upcoming match, Homicide really celebrating things.
Yeah, it's kind of a heavy-handed foreshadowing of him not taking Rave seriously also.
Yeah. And I don't know what I was going to say this, but I'm going to say this here. I have to give you big credit, Matt. I might as well bring it up here because, or I'm going to tip my hat a little bit. This is not a good Ring of Honor show, but I will say this. I enjoyed the show, even though I didn't really enjoy the show, it was probably in the bottom 10% of Ring of Honor shows that we've seen, but coming off the worst show ever. But more than that, it was the Cornette thing. And it's something watching at this show, I thought of you, my precious Matt, because on recent shows, anyone that's been listening will know Matt, a theme Matt's brought up time and time again is his theory that something that brought down the last quarter of this year of Ring of Honor is the Jim Cornette angle, not just the Homicide part storyline, but kind of cast Matt. I think correct me if I'm being out of turn here. You've been saying it kind of cast a cloud over the entire promotion, the whole tone and vibes of the promotion. And every time you brought that up, you ever have that thing where you agree with somebody intellectually, but they feel it on a 10 out of 10 in terms of their conviction, and you're like, I'm a 5 on conviction. I agree intellectually what you're saying, but I don't feel it like you. The weird thing watching the show is I felt it at a 10 after he was gone. I was like, holy shit, Matt was so right. I'm feeling it at a 10 like he was, because even though the show is not a good show at all, it just felt so much lighter to me. I felt like there was a weight lifted off my shoulders that that Cornette was not involved in the company anymore. Just that knowledge, there's just a lightness. I was like, oh, this is just a regular, somewhat below average Ring of Honor show. And I enjoyed it in a way I don't think I've enjoyed. There's been better shows than this, but there was just something to the show, and I just kept thinking, now I really completely get what you were saying, because the cloud is gone now.
Yeah, I think that was an accurate depiction of how I felt, and I will say, I guess since you tipped your hat, I'll tip mine. I liked this show seemingly a decent amount more than you. And, probably part of it was the tonal shift. It felt, here's what I would say. It felt like Ring of Honor again. Does that make sense?
It didn't feel like they were fighting against the fans.
Yeah, it didn't feel like they were trying to do some weird WWE thing or TNA thing that just didn't fit what you wanted from Ring of Honor. It felt like it was an ROH show, certainly a B show, but not a show that was just doing all sorts of things that are completely anathema to what anyone would want to watch ROH for in the first place. That makes sense?
Yeah, I think I think that's a great way of putting it. What I would add is, I think what this show had, just thinking about it now, that other shows in this last 2 or 3 months didn't have, even shows that were significantly better from just a match and things that happened standpoint, was this show felt comfortable. You know, there was a comfort I had watching this that the last couple of months I haven't had a comfort watching it. There was always a bit of an annoyance to a lot of those shows.
Fair.
And that brings us to the six-man gauntlet match, the second match on the main card. Nigel McGuinness defeated B.J. Whitmer, Brent Albright, Jason Blade, Jimmy Jacobs, and Pele Primo in 34 minutes, 21 seconds. The eliminations went as follows. Brent Albright defeated Pele Primo in 2 minutes, 5 seconds when he made him tap out to the crowbar, arm submission. Then Albright beat Jason Blade in another 4 minutes, 24 seconds when he made him tap out to the crowbar. Then B.J. Whitmer defeated Brent Albright via pinfall in another 13 minutes, 20 seconds after he hit him with a German suplex. Jimmy Jacobs defeated B.J. Whitmer via pinfall in 5 seconds flat after a roll-up using a low blow. And then Nigel McGuinness defeated Jimmy Jacobs via pinfall in 14 minutes and 27 seconds after he hit a lariat off the second rope. So this was a smartly laid out gauntlet match that used its structure to accomplish a few things. Like, it's really not one long, obviously no gauntlet match is really long match, but some, they bleed into each other more. This was very much Brent Albright gets 2 squash matches, then he wrestles a full match with B.J. Whitmer, but you can at least say working the 2 squashes gives him at least a slight out to losing to Whitmer. Jacobs then gets to beat Whitmer in a moment that isn't a match, is really just an angle to set up, their coming match the next night. And then Nigel McGuinness and Jimmy Jacobs are basically 2 fresh wrestlers having a full-length wrestling match. So really this was 2 squashes, 2 full-length matches, and an angle. And I guess we'll go through it match by match. So first we had a Pele versus Brent Albright. There was very little to this. Pele does actually get a little offense in the 2 minutes. He gets like a few strikes to break free of a hold. He hits a Rana, but then Albright kills him with a German suplex and a half Nelson suplex and puts on the crowbar. My biggest note on this match was Pele was wearing a Underdog, the cartoon character, hoodie to the ring in case you needed to have be bashed over the head with subtext. I don't know if you had any thoughts about the squash.
I'll talk more about how I thought it helped Albright after the second squash, but as far the only negative thing I would say is kind of a bummer to follow up Pele's big inspirational win, crowd surfing, with him getting absolutely decimated in the very next match. I don't know if that was always the plan or not, but it doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense to me.
And speaking of, let's bring up something earlier about like little juicy tidbits I've learned. Something I think I just learned from re-listening to Jimmy Rave's interview on an honorable mention to research for this episode is, I think Jimmy Rave on that show says that he claims that the Pele Primo crowd surfing was a suggestion he gave to Pele. So apparently that's the impetus for the Pele Primo crowd surfing stuff was him saying he told Pele before one match that, like, I bet you if you ducked to the crowd, the fans would crowd surf you. And considering that we've seen him dropped at least once, possibly twice already, Jimmy Rave only half right about that. They will crowd surf him to a point.
Yes.
So I will just also say Albright got a pretty big reaction at the end of the match and throughout his portion of this gauntlet. And then after this match, he shakes Pele's hand, but then he throws him to the outside like a bag of shit. So he's kind of the gruff, badass character, clearly. I don't know if he's outright heel, but he's just the kind of. And that brings us to Albright versus Jason Blade. Again, the crowd is fairly into Albright. They're cheering for him right at the start of this match. They're expecting another squash. Blade gets in a bit of offense in this match, and the first time he does, some of the crowd actually boos. So like they clearly just they don't want to see Jason Blade do stuff. They just want to see Albright squash people, at least these lower level guys right now. And the thing is, I thought was Albright is just okay at squashing people. Like, he looks huge at ROH physically. His suplexes look really good, but he has this really relaxed, slow pace to how he works these squashes, which maybe another wrestler would make him seem like this very like deliberate killer. But I don't get killer instinct vibes from Brent Albright. He does hit a really nice dropkick here. I'll give him that. I mean, it was a pretty fine squash. This was Jason Blade's first ROH match in over 5 months. and he comes back to get squashed by Brent Albright. And yeah, so yeah, and he wins the same way he won the last match. He has this combo of moves where he does like a gory special into a hot shot where he has him in the gory special and he drops the opponent throat first on the ropes. Then he does the German, then the half Nelson, then the crowbar. So what did you think about these first two squashes?
Yeah, I think I liked them more than you did. I think Albright seemed way more explosive here than he did in the match with Daniels, which is a good thing. And he clearly worked. Like he got very over with this crowd, doing very little. And I guess, maybe it's a little bit of a cheat in that you don't really get guys getting to be booked in the traditional I'm a big guy, going to be dominant and squash people way that wrestling has done for a billion years. That's not really ROH's thing. But I thought that Albright did it pretty effectively, and I think it worked. And I definitely saw I saw what Gabe saw in Albright here way more than I did in that other match that he had against Daniels.
Well, then that leads us nicely to our third match in the gauntlet, BJ Whitmer and Brent Albright. Matt, a battle of 2/3 of the future Hangman 3. The Hangmen are colliding. What do you think about this then?
So it wasn't perfect. Like it wasn't the most exciting match I ever saw. And I thought it was interesting that the crowd in a lot of ways seemed to like Albright more than Whitmer in some ways. I also thought it was interesting that, as Long Island goes, you did get a boring chant that the crowd tried to shout down, so it did get slow. But there were things that I appreciated about this match. Like, for instance, I like that they sort of seemed like, oh, wow, we realize how evenly matched we are, and so we're going to be very tentative about each other and, be very respectful, and they're, hesitantly going for knuckle locks and waist locks and, afraid to make a mistake. I liked how Albright would get frustrated as Whitmer would get to the ropes every time he tried to lock in a move. Whitmer sort of had Albright well scouted. And then eventually they go back to some higher impact offense, sudden exploders. Albright's working on the leg, despite the fact that his finisher works the arm. We know that Whitmer just came back from broken ankle, so it makes sense. Whitmer does a classic babyface comeback eventually, but unfortunately it doesn't really get a lot of heat. This is when you kind of get the boring chant, and I think you even get a "I want Pele back" comment from the crowd, which is not very nice to the wrestlers in the ring, but eventually Albright goes for a suplex combo. Whitmer reverses into his own suplex, and then Albright reverses, hits one of his own, and then Whitmer gets 2 German suplexes in a row and gets a pretty shocking sudden clean pin. Like, it felt kind of out of nowhere. But I guess, for me, the surprising finish kind of worked because it shows, okay, Albright's going to be a dominant ass kicker, but there are people here that can stand up to him, and it sets up Albright versus Whitmer rivalry, which lasts a little while. Which, some people have mixed feelings about. But I like that it accomplished something. I liked how it kind of built on what Albright did in the first 2 matches into okay, now Albright has met his match kind of way. So I thought it was all right, despite the fact that the crowd seemingly did not.
Again, we should go into the Albright's all right. That should have been his catchphrase, not his get out or tap out. Albright's all right,
That's right.
Based on that original chant. From those fans in that first Albright match, they got it right.
They got it all right.
So to me, at this point of our ROH rewatch, I'm all right saying that for me, Brent Albright I'm slotting him into that Randy Orton late 2006 ROH Christopher Daniels category of everything they do is technically well done. They look and feel like a wrestler, but most of what they do bores me to goddamn tears. It feels almost unfair, though, to compare Albright to those two because those two guys both have way more charisma than Albright. Not that Albright has absolutely zero charisma, but Randy Orton has 8,000% more charisma than Brent Albright. This match does have some decent structure to it. The first few matches are Albright using his mat wrestling, and I do like Albright's amateur wrestling. I wrote in my notes, I like how he takes down and rides a dude, so which, out of context, seems like I'm writing about a completely different subject. But
you could like that too. That's cool.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's just a different text file on my Dropbox, man. But the problem I had with that section even is the story is just like he keeps taking down Whitmer and mounting him, and then he doesn't do anything, and then he just gets up and goes fuck. Like it's not like a back and forth chess match. It's Albright just taking Whitmer down, laying on top of him almost motionless for a while, and then getting up and being frustrated and being like, ugh. His ability to turtle apparently is just impenetrable. Then we get a strike exchange. Albright starts working over, like you mentioned, Whitmer's surgically repaired ankle, which again, that's a good classic wrestling psychology. Like a guy comes back from an injury, you work over the injured body part. But again, I just thought how he did it was boring. It's just that Albright issue I have with him. His pacing is so methodical, and he doesn't have the charisma or aura that really makes that methodical pace work for me. But then Whitmer starts to make a comeback, and the interesting thing about this match to me was the crowd action, like you said. Like at the start of the match, you brought this up. The crowd's clearly choosing Albright over Whitmer, like even booing Whitmer on a couple points. And I thought that was surprising because even though Whitmer has never been an insanely over guy, I would say we're probably like in the middle of the popularity peak of his career, right? Like the CZW feud, the Jimmy Jacobs feud.
I would say the CZW feud. There was a pretty big drop off immediately after that.
Yeah,
I would say I would say he was super popular during that feud for the ROH crowds, but it was fleeting.
yeah, and yeah, this was the match that definitely was like, oh, that goodwill is might be exhausted already. And like on this night, the crowd, this guy who had just, the Necro Butcher barbed wire match, the CZW feud, the crazy stuff he's done in matches with Jimmy Jacobs, and on this night, I kind of felt bad for him, although. Feeling bad for BJ Whitmer.
Knowing what you know now makes it.
Yeah, maybe I
shouldn't
feel bad for him exactly, but it's kind of weird just to be like, we picked this crowd of Ring of Honor regular fans, presumably, are like, we picked the dude that had a cup of coffee on SmackDown over you, even after all that, BJ. And I also thought it was weird, like when the crowd, like you mentioned, they chant boring. They chant boring, like when the match starts, the pace starts to pick up a little bit. I was like, this is the time of the match where you're screaming boring. And then we get the finish where, Albright goes for the suplex combo. Whitmer fights to hit some Germans of his own. He actually hits more Germans, including a final one that gets almost zero crowd action. And it's a pin that no one is expecting. And I felt like that was kind of flat, actually. I felt like it just didn't seem big enough for the end. No one there was thinking that was going to be the end. I thought this was very low average. I never got quite to board levels watching it, but like the structure and just the weirdness of the crowd reactions actually kind of kept me engaged. But it's weird because I was like, this is a really successful night for Brent Albright. The crowd clearly liked him a lot, but I just thought coming away from this match, like, I don't know if I can handle 3 more years of watching this guy, but he's going to stick around in Ring of Honor, but we'll see if my opinion changes, Matt. Next, we had Jimmy Jacobs versus BJ Whitmer, which, as I said earlier, this was just an angle. Jimmy runs to the ring right after Whitmer wins, and as the ref turns his back to call for the bell to start their match, Jimmy low blows the still hurt Whitmer, rolls him up for the win. The crowd actually chants for Jimmy after that, so I was like, man, this crowd really hated BJ Whitmer because they were pumped to see Jimmy completely fuck Whitmer over here. So
they knew the future.
Yeah. And then finally, that brings us to the final match, Jimmy Jacobs versus Nigel McGuinness, for the winner of the gauntlet. I thought this was okay. Jacobs is in a bit of a weird transition moment in his career where he is which he's been at different points in his career, where he's playing a very goofy, or in this case, not just a goofy, but a subservient character. But in the ring, he's starting to be called on to start wrestling like more high profile matches against bigger names where they're like asking a little bit more from him in the ring, and they're supposed to be a bit more even Steven work ratey, like draw fans in that sense. And I think the problem is sometimes, including this match, I think it's a bit of a weird transition. Like Nigel's just patronizing Jimmy at the start, and even though they work this match, like it's like a standard back and forth mid-card ROH work rate match, sometimes I will say, for whatever reason, it was hard for me to completely suspend disbelief for Jimmy on offense. And especially when like Nigel's in full meathead mode here, like he's slapping himself in the face to psych himself up. He's just laying it in on the lariats, and meanwhile Jimmy is still like blowing kisses to Lacey and doing some of his very mid-aughts indie offense, like the satellite head scissors, which is like flashy stuff, but compared to Nigel's, it's just, again, like a completely different world of offense. It's not bad. It's just not, like, to me, it wasn't like a completely smooth mix. I'd say like this match is best when it was Nigel on offense, because then it just feels like a pretty down the middle 2006 Nigel McGuinness match, which is a pretty good thing. And Jimmy always takes a good beating. But when Jimmy's on offense, that's what I thought was a little weird. And also probably doesn't help that, like, it wasn't Jimmy's absolute best night. Like that cool flying headbutt he does from the top rope to a standing opponent that he started to break out recently that we both like. He botches it on this night, and the unforgiving, not great Long Island crowd does the "you fucked up" chant, and Nigel even joins in with them. I did like the final few minutes. They had a few good little zig and zag counters of each other's big moves at the end. I particularly really loved Jimmy nailing Nigel with a spear as he came off the ropes for the rebound lariat. And I liked also Nigel ending the match where he like catches Jimmy as he does like the conjure code and just drops him on the top rope to set up for the second rope turnbuckle lariat, whatever you would call that.
I call it the rope straddle lariat.
Yeah, the straddle lariat. That's a good name for it, Matt. If that isn't the official name, you did a good job there, Matt. But I'd give this a strong above average, but I'd also say it's one of those matches that reinforces how stupid a gimmick a gauntlet match is, where like the winner of the match was the last guy who came in, and the guy who was second last was the guy who entered in second last and basically didn't have to wrestle either. Like, it's one of those matches that makes you kind of feel like stupid for ever booking a gauntlet match. But what'd you think about this?
Yeah, I liked it a little more than you did, mainly because I really enjoyed those last few minutes with the with all the kickouts and near falls. I think, as Nigel continues to get over this lariat version of himself, we're still early enough in the cycle that it's not like, all right, enough of this yet, So there's novelty in all these lariats and all these kickouts, and I thought Jimmy did a good job of selling and also doing some of his reversals. And I thought there was some awkwardness earlier in the match. Definitely that missed headbutt. And then Nigel, the reason he started getting in on the "you fucked up" chant, I thought, was because he was trying to cover. He was like, he said, he fucked up, as in like, yeah, that was a thing that happened in the match, not like a miscommunication spot between us. Like, I kind of enjoyed that. I also thought it was funny. So Nigel did that move where he bends the guy's arm behind him and then bends all the way back so the arm is pushed together. And I know that was one of Nigel's signature spots in this era. I'm trying to think if Nigel had done that before this match, because he does it a lot after this. And I'm thinking maybe he did it in the Marufuji match, but I can't remember for sure. But that's a really cool spot. But what I was going to say is when he does that move, he yells, "You don't see this on SmackDown." And I'm trying to was trying to figure out, was he responding to someone in the crowd, or was that supposed to be a knock on Brent Albright? I couldn't really tell. But because of all those entertaining parts and the finishing sequence, I enjoyed this for what it was. I think, and I think we're going, and you're going to see even in the promo at the end of the show, we're getting to the point where this whole Jimmy blowing kisses at Lacey thing is getting pretty long in the tooth. It's been months now. I do think that we're pretty close to a pivot point, which is good, but let's get there already. That's what I say.
Yeah, I agree. Like we're getting, well, we can talk about it at the end, but first off, I just want to say I loved how you described the Nigel thing, because that made me just start to think of, like, I would love if a wrestler, like, their instinctual reaction to every botched spot was to immediately get really self-conscious and start really blaming their opponent, like, to the crowd, like, just to be clear, he did it. Like, I had nothing to do with this. Like, a wrestler that is extreme, like, just destroys the kayfabe of every match. Like, that wasn't me. He clearly slipped. I didn't do that. I didn't drop him. And this, the last note from this is, I will also say, this is the match where on commentary, Gabe points out that Colt Cabana's away this weekend in the UK on Overseas Wrestling Tour. So kind of a rare weekend for Ring of Honor at this time, where they didn't have Brian and they didn't have Colt, which are like two of the guys that are basically on almost every show, and they don't have either of them for this weekend. So kind of a very different vibey weekend in that sense too.
Yeah, but you know what? I didn't really miss them on this show. Like, I think kind of it's good to get a little break and to change the pace, especially Cabana. I feel like, his stuff is is sometimes gets a little bit much, and I think it's sometimes nice to be like, all right, let's get a break so when you come back, we appreciate you more.
And the one nice thing about it too was Gabe did a thing that he often did that he was pretty good at, which was having a wrestler having kind of two feuds or mingling feuds on the burner at the same time. So it's like, even though they had just really started up like a Colt Cabana Jimmy Jacobs feud, that storyline took that twist. Well, they can just go to this weekend the BJ Whitmer Jimmy Jacobs feud, so
Yep.
you don't really miss a beat. We then joined the Briscoes backstage in what, Matt, I'm going to just say right now, I think this is my favorite moment of the entire show because I will describe this promo. Jay Briscoe says it's his first singles match with Samoa Joe since Joe left this scar on his forehead in their Cage Match 04, and he, in fact, does show that there is a scar on his forehead from, again, if you were not with us on the entire saga through the years, one of the damnedest blade jobs you will see in wrestling history. If that kind of thing appeals, I feel weird recommending that because that might not be for everyone. But if you want a spectacle of that kind, there's nothing quite like that. Jay says he's going to soften Joe up for their tag street fight, the Briscoes versus Homicide and Joe. That happens the next night. And Mark says tonight he has Shingo in a singles match, although he and Jay then start to do a bit which I don't even know if it's a bit or not. This is what makes it my favorite moment of the night, where they don't know what Shingo's name is, and Jay thinks it might be Shango or Chango, and then at the end of the promo, Jay says, and I quote, "Time to man up, Chango, Joe." And that's how the promo ends. Time to man up, Chango, Joe. And I just wrote in my notes, rest in peace, Jay Briscoe. Rest in peace, the concept of Chango.
This is many years before the movie Django Unchained came out. So it was not a reference to that. So I was like, was this being racist, or was this just like being silly, or was this an honest mistake? And I can't figure it out.
I did feel a little guilty. I was thinking, is this like a racist thing? But you know what? The magic of the Briscoes, you never know, Matt. Was this a joke? Know. Was this racist? Was this a gimmick? I don't know. It didn't feel mean-spirited.
No, it didn't.
But I just thought it was funny to say, time to man up, Chango.
Yes.
But, sorry, it's so fucking stupid. That brings us to the Ring of Honor World Tag Team Title No Disqualification match. The Kings of Wrestling, Chris Hero and Claudio Castagnoli, successfully defend the titles when they defeat Austin Aries and Roderick Strong in 16 minutes, 39 seconds, when Hero pinned Strong after he and Claudio hit the Heroes Welcome Kings of Wrestling edition, which is basically just like the Heroes Welcome neckbreaker, but Claudio's holding the guy's leg, so he's completely off the mat. Johnny Nitro from the ROH Live Journal community, he wrote in his live notes, Aries was greeted with Nash's bitch chants from our section, and his reaction of shrugging his shoulders was priceless. So yeah, this doesn't come up on commentary, but we're back in the Austin Aries, or I guess maybe this was this all then the Austin Star era? So, guys starting to get mocked for what they do in there. And Matt, before I throw it to you, the last little note on this is Game on Commentary reminds us this is the last tag team title shot Strong and Aries are going to get against the Kings of Wrestling in this reign, which very important considering they're about to lose it. But what do you think about this? This is the third and final time these two teams wrestled.
Yeah, there are a few chants on this show that indicate that, yeah, maybe Gabe was right, that maybe Long Island is TNA country. That's one of them. So this match, I felt mixed things about at different points, because at the beginning of the match, I was like, oh, this is like a boilerplate, crowd and ringside brawl. They're not really doing that much that's interesting. They're fighting in the crowd. It's nondescript. I would say gradually over the course of the match, they drew me into it. Starting, I think, with the part where they start, the Kings of Wrestling start duct taping Aries. They try to duct tape his arms or his legs around the ring post. And I was like, I don't know if duct tape would really do the trick here, but I'll suspend my disbelief. And they use a lot of tape on him. So maybe that is good enough. They just put a lot of duct tape around his legs. And you'd think they would take that opportunity to just pummel Aries into oblivion, but they mostly ignore him to do their little knee walk thing, or deep knee lunges, as you deem them. And and they kick Strong back and forth, do the double big boot. They're showing off a lot. And I realize why they did this. Because Aries is going to do a great hot tag, but since this is like a tornado match, there are no hot tags. So the way that Aries gets hot tagged is he escapes the duct tape, right? He starts pulling it off slowly as they work over Strong. They do some interesting stuff on Strong. They almost do like, I would describe it as like a double stunt pull, where they both, pick him up by the leg and like pull his legs apart. Like, Claudio throws a whole section of guardrail into the ring. They put the guardrail on 2 chairs and try to put Strong on it, but that's when Aries frees himself, and that's where he kind of does his hot tag. He saves Strong. He press slams Hero off the top onto the guardrail. He bulldogs Castagnoli on the guardrail, and the crowd is genuinely, albeit briefly, very hot for Aries' comeback. Then the Aries and Strong team do a double backbreaker on Castagnoli across 2 chairs, and then do the chop brainbuster combo. But Hero pulls Sinclair out of the ring, and Aries immediately hits him with the heat-seeking missile. I thought Aries was great here. I thought he was the standout performer in this match. Then you kind of get some of the near-fall Strong hitting a Gibson driver, throwing the timekeeper's table into the ring because he can't find one under the ring, sets up a table in the corner. And Aries is able to put Claudio across the table, but Claudio avoids being put through it and actually puts his feet on it for leverage for a 2 count, which is a first of putting your feet on the table for leverage. I don't remember seeing that recently. And you get a few more shots. They start putting the briefcase in play, where Claudio swings it at Aries, and Aries ducks and kicks it into Claudio's head for 2. And Aries is pissed and kicks the briefcase to the floor while yelling, "Bullshit!" Which Aries is, I don't know, he's mad at that briefcase. I don't know. And at that point, Hero comes at Strong with the briefcase, but Strong ducks, hits the double knees, hits the big boot, gets a 2 count, and then they try to do a dropkick power bomb on Hero through a table, and this is the part that brings me back out of the match, Shingo pops up. Yes, that's his name, Shingo. He breaks up the attempt, power bomb Strong through the table, and Gabe notes, as Shingo did in a previous promo, Shingo likes tables. That's his gimmick. He's a guy who likes tables. And Kings of Wrestling hit Strong with a double team Heroes welcome and get the win. I understand the ending, and I get why. I like that they're getting Shingo in the mix very quickly, but I think this could have been a good match, like with if it had like a more decisive finish. But I get also that you don't want Kings of Wrestling to cleanly beat Aries and Strong. But I don't know. It's ROH. Sometimes you do that sort of thing. So I don't know. I have very mixed feelings. There was a decent chunk of this match that I really did enjoy, and I thought Aries was great. I thought the beginning and the ending were not to my liking. So I don't know where I land on this. All I'll say is I thought Aries did a great job.
I liked this match, I think, more than you, but I would say, listening to you review it, this is a weird term to use, but my emotional journey watching this match was very similar to yours, I think. I feel like I kind of went down and up where you went down and up. The match starts with them brawling in the crowd, and the first thing I'll say is, anytime you brawl right beside a merchandise table in wrestling and you don't go into the merch table, that's an automatic half-a-star deduction in my book. Like, I know that would be incredibly annoying to clean up, and right before intermission, which this match was, I think, that probably would like actively hurt their money for this show. But come on, you can't brawl right next to a merch table and not go into the merch table. But they brawl around ringside to start, and it's just kind of bland. Like, there are a couple fun moments in this section, but it's usually when they're just doing wrestling moves, like at ringside. Like, my 2 favorite moments in the crowd brawl were Claudio doing the gourd buster on Aries on the barricade, so it really worked over those injured ribs, which continues the thread from their whole trilogy. And then Aries doing like that big running high cross body over the barricade into the crowd on Claudio. I thought that looked great, and I agree with you that Aries, like he often does, looked really good in this match. Eventually, the match gets its way into the ring. We get the Aries thing duct taped around the ring post. And man, I wrote my notes, man, this is an extended duct tape sequence. Like, they really take their time to tie him up. Aries keeps trying to fight them off. And like you mentioned, I think you did a great job bringing it, like, making this point, it's a really smart move, right? Because it's a tornado tag, but it lets them do the hot tag. Because Aries has to literally just be feet away from his partner as he's isolated 1-on-2, and he can't get to him. And he's keeping, he keeps trying to fiddle with the tape. The one thing I thought that was kind of funny was he keeps fiddling with the tape, and then at one point he keeps trying to reach for the Kings of Wrestling briefcase, and I just thought, what's a better tool, Austin, to free yourself from duct tape? Your 10 fingers or like a round cornered, like big briefcase? Like, what are you going to do with this locked briefcase to get yourself free of duct tape? But he kept reaching for it. You mentioned, the Roderick Strong moment where they had him kept spreading his legs like he was doing a ping pong show or something. And another weird thing is, no, actually, I'll just keep looking through my notes. So, so anyway, I'm going to talk about how I felt about this match. Up until this point in the match, I was kind of grouchy. I was like, this is having a few fun moments, but I thought yet again, this is another match where, like all three, where I felt like these two teams don't have really good chemistry. Something's just a little bit off, and they're all so talented. And then Hero and Claudio have that moment you talked about where they set up a barricade on two open chairs. They're about to throw Roddy off the top turnbuckle through it. And then Aries finally escapes the duct tape. He saves Roddy. He slams Hero off the top turnbuckle onto the barricade instead. It's a great spot, like you mentioned. It gets a huge reaction from the crowd. It's just a perfect payoff to having Aries trapped for a while. Like when your guy comes back from being trapped like that, you want to have like a huge, impactful comeback spot. That was a perfect spot for that. And I felt like from that moment on, this match actually kind of fucking rocked. Like, it's the most fun of the three matches these two teams have had. Like, it's the most fun I've had watching them wrestle each other. It's just big moves, lots of running around. Feels like these two teams are finally kind of going ambitious, really putting it all out there for an extended period like they haven't done in the entire three matches. We get that weird spot, which I appreciate in the corner that you mentioned. Like, I like you don't know if I've ever seen a wrestler use a table propped into the corner to put his feet on for leverage on a pin like Claudio did. Claudio at one point got Uranagi'd onto two open chairs, which is a bump I was shocked Claudio took. Like, to me, that's like a kind of bump that Necro Butcher would take. And it looked really painful. Like, the chairs didn't completely break. They kind of warped. And I was just like, I'm shocked that Claudio, especially when he's about to go to the WWE, was like, yeah, you can Uranagi me onto two open chairs. But, and then we get Aries using the briefcase a few times, which plays into their previous two matches, including a near fall where Aries is being pinned by Hero, and he holds the briefcase and just bonks Hero on the head with it to break up the pinfall. It makes a nice, decent bonking sound. I love a good bonk, Matt. Sega game, anything.
I know you do, Trevor.
But then I get what you're saying about the finish, which is because it's the kind of finish Ring of Honor almost never does, right? It's like a very cheap guy, Chango runs in and, the faces look like they're about to win. He just attacks Roddy. The Kings immediately pick up the cheap win. And, that's a very out of WWE, kind of win. And to end the feud between two teams, just this completely smaller feud just kind of coming in. But I'll say this. I was so happy that these two teams finally hit a groove against each other in those final minutes. I was like, you know what? I don't even mind the finish. I'm just so appreciative. So I would give this like a very strong good, like 3.5 stars to maybe a low, very good, like somewhere in that 3.5 to 3.75 stars. I end up, thanks to like, to me, once Aries like saved Roddy, it was the first great stretch of wrestling these two teams have had against each other, in my opinion.
Yeah, and like, I mean, I definitely agree with that part. And this is why I don't think that this show was as bad as you're saying it was. Like, there's some really good wrestling on this show. Not a ton, but some. And I don't think this was the only one.
I did also like, did you notice Claudio doing a European uppercut? And then he was doing it at ringside, and then he ended it with a middle finger to the fans. So he's like swing his arm, but as it comes up, he has the middle finger. Like,
I did not notice that. That's
it was and the other thing I noticed, we talk about fun Gabe commentary. Gabe, even though he was now booking Chris Hero, still obviously had a clear problem with how Hero looks, and you can tell he just delights at one point. He goes, where did Chris Hero get that ring attire? He's like, where did he get the giant yellow garbage bag that makes his pants? And like, he can't even finish the sentence. Like, he's so tickled that he's shitting on Chris Hero's gear yet again. So you can tell he just loves needling Hero's gear. It's then intermission time, And Gary Michael Capetta is backstage with the top-of-the-class trophy holder, Shane Hagedorn. Gary says he has a bit of a scoop, and he wants to know if it's true or not. And then he says that scoop is
Well. So
Shane.
I actually I think I heard that differently. I thought that Gary said that he had a bit of a juicy tidbit.
He basically he hears that Shane Hagedorn and Adam Pearce are pretty close, and I was like, that's your scoop. Like, it seems to me that was already kind of getting apparent. I don't know, but Shane says he and Pearce are close, and they know what's going on in each other's heads at all times. Capetta wants to know what's up with Pearce's recent challenge to Homicide. Hagedorn says Pearce is mourning their leader Jim Cornette being removed from his position. Shane says if Homicide thought what Cornette did to him with a strap at Death Before Dishonor was bad, it'll be nothing compared to what Adam Pearce does to him in a strap match. And then near the end, I will say I actually showed this to Shane Hagedorn. I was like, look at you. You look like you are breaking up here. I don't know if I'm not 100% convinced. This might end up being the image for the show because near the end of this promo, Shane looks like he starts not being able to think of more ways to describe how Pearce will beat up Homicide. Like he starts just going like, when he whips him, when he comes down with the strap, it's just going to be, it's going to be something. And then Gary wraps up the promo, and I swear it looks like that Shane's just trying not to laugh, like going, I went to a blank. And as usual, we are no takes twos. And then when I showed that to Shane, he just said, it looked like Gary was tickled by it. So like, Gary Michael Capetta, I always enjoy him just a little. Again, they're really pushing this Adam Pearce, strap match with a Homicide.
It's interesting that they're still bringing Gary Michael Capetta to these shows sometimes because he really does so little. Like he's usually there for like one really short promo. I find it interesting. But I thought this was a good promo by Shane Hagedorn. I think that it was pretty solid and it got over what it needed to get over. And I like the idea that like Pearce challenges Homicide to a strap match that never happens because, well, we'll get to it, but it'll go a different direction.
I also think, and I don't know how I'd be interested in your opinion on this. This Ring of Honor rewatch has really kind of made me feel like Gary Michael Capetta was like, there was more wrestling, not Ring of Honor in general, but like wrestling in general could have done with Gary Michael Capetta as a backstage guy. Because I think he has something that I think is one of my key things for a backstage interviewer in wrestling, which is like something Gene Okerlund had in spades in his prime, which is you need to do two very opposite things at the same time. You need to have like this respect and authority from the fans when you're like, so you can use that when you're like participating in serious angles backstage. You can get indignant. You can call wrestlers to task, things like that. But you also need to kind of be able to be like play the straight man in really silly comedy bits because that's going to happen without losing your integrity. Because it's really easy to become like Kevin Kelly in WWF with ThROH, right? Or Alex Marvez is kind of becoming now with the Young Bucks, right? Where like, yeah, you're really funny, but in a way where it's like, that's going to be
you have no credibility anymore.
Yeah. So I felt like Gene Okerlund was going to do that. I feel like Gary Michael Capetta is like a guy I feel like walks that line in where like I've seen him in these Ring of Honor shows where he's in part of some really goofy things and he's being like a good straight man and playing along, but I still feel like he still has some credibility and like authority to him. Like I feel like he could have been good in that role in a major like TV promotion.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that maybe he just for ROH didn't want to do more than he did. I think, it was kind of an easy gig for him in some ways, except for the travel probably. But yeah, I mean, he definitely could have done more for a promotion that could have asked more of him and paid him more. I think that he had a lot left to give, but I would assume that he was doing other things with his life at this point, and this was just sort of like a cool thing to do on the weekend sometimes. But I don't know for sure.
Yeah. And that would bring us to our first match back from intermission. Shingo, a.k.a. Chango, defeated Mark Briscoe via pinfall in 12 minutes, 22 seconds after he hit the blood fall. So this is another match for me where it started off, and it's kind of just a generic mid-card 2006 ROH match. There's some action, but not crazy action, not much else to it. And then Shingo starts cheating. And at first I got depressed, Matt, because it's a trope that, foreign wrestlers, especially Japanese wrestlers, had to come to America as the sneaking, cheating heel to get over. It's a trend I think that was thankfully starting to fade at this point in the indies. And in the coming years, it would start to fade in the bigger promotions, but not quite yet. Like, remember in the timeline, we are still 4 years before we get to Okada going to TNA and them booking him as a fucking Green Hornet character as Okato. We still had big stereotyping problems. But briefly during this match, like, Shingo comes to the ring with this match, like waving a fan, and he throws it in the crowd. Briefly during the match, you hear a section of the crowd, not a majority, but a group of the fans chanting USA, USA. And I was just like, I don't know. Like, I have mixed feelings at my age with wrestling's history of using xenophobia to sell stuff. Like, I can't deny that I was entertained by a lot of it growing up, and it's a big part of wrestling's history. But it's just kind of a bummer how many talented wrestlers had to immediately default to that when they came to America, because that was just like what you had to do. And Shingo's not doing a ton of it here, but then here's the thing, Matt. I actually thought all the cheating made this match better because it at least added some color to the match. Like, sometimes when someone goes heel, they usually just do 1 or 2 cheating moves, and then otherwise they wrestle the match normally. Like, I filled my cheating quota. I did my 1 or 2 heel things. That makes me a heel. But I like that Shingo did a whole bunch of them. Like, he choked Mark with a chair. He takes a powder to the outside when he gets hurt to, like, cool his boots. He mule kicks Mark in the nuts, and then he acts like he was low blowed. He keeps pointing to the ref to look elsewhere. He does the goddamn shattered dream, like, kick to the nuts in the corner. Like, it's all classic old school heel stuff you've seen a million times before, but you don't see it very often in Ring of Honor, and so it's a little more interesting here because it's not as played out here. And I will also say, like, Shingo, even though he's doing all this heel stuff, he doesn't go, like, minimal on his offense. Like, he does grind down with a couple basic submissions, but he does some cool stuff. He works fairly hard. I still love his big giant swing choke where he's doing the giant swing while he has a guy in a choke. I continue to be a fan of his cool fist drop. Any guy that does a fist drop is okay in my books. And I keep noticing, like, these little peaks of his charisma that we'd see more later in his career, where he's just a guy that interacts with the crowd a little more than you might expect. A guy that's basically like a little over a year into wrestling that's coming over to the U.S. for one of his first, like, his big excursion. And, his facial expressions are better than you'd think for a guy at that level. And then on the other end, I would add, and as this match keeps going, Mark Briscoe, I thought, just worked his butt off. This is another one of those classic Briscoe matches we talk about where those two guys rarely did not work at 100%. And I thought this was a great example of that. Like, this match has no story. It's the first match back from intermission. It's a singles match for Mark when he's primarily a tag wrestler. And it's a match where he's going to lose clean. And despite all that, I got the impression he's working just as hard as he'd work for any other match. He's doing all his big stuff. He's doing his biggest moves. He's flying off the top rope. He's doing a big dive to the floor. And, I would give this like a good rating, like a solid 3 stars, which might seem low given some of my stuff, but I just thought we've been seeing a lot of matches, mid-card matches in this spot on recent shows where it feels like they've been like 2.5, 2 3/4. And this thought like, it's just a little bit better. And sometimes matches on this point in the show being just a little bit better can kind of make the difference between like a mess show and a good show. I do not think this is a good show. We'll get into later because I know you're a bit higher on this, but I did like this match, actually.
Yeah, the way you're talking about the show makes it seem like you liked it more than your overall assessment. Yeah. But yeah, I think I actually like this match a little bit less than you. I think the crowd heat hurt it a lot, and I don't feel like it really built in any way. But that said, I do think they both worked hard. I thought that it was never boring. It kept moving, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed that aspect of it. I think the effort was fantastic. Like, like Mark, it always is. I really like his big tope suicida off over the top. That's always great, but he does a great job with it. And I noticed though that he almost clipped his legs on the top rope, but the ringside area was so narrow that like even though he didn't get as much like distance as he normally would have gotten, Shingo was able to catch him fine. The other thing that of note was that Gabe pointed out that Gary Morer was back back as a ref in ROH for the first time in an extremely long time. And I would not have noticed that if they had not pointed it out. That was one of the refs, you'd see a lot in like 2003, 2004, I think into 2005, but you really hadn't seen him much in a long time. It felt like for a long time, a lot of the ROH shows were basically just Todd Sinclair and Paul Turner. and then Keener would kind of get back involved a little bit more, and now Gary Moreira is back, so a full roster of Ring of Honor referees again, which is nice. But yeah, I think a heel versus heel match is always tough for a crowd, and that's basically what this was because the Briscoes hadn't turned yet. But like I said, can't knock their effort. I thought it moved very well. I just didn't. It just didn't. The sum of its parts didn't come together for me as much as they did for you.
And after the match, Roderick Strong runs in. He attacks Shingo, who quickly bails to the floor. Roddy gives chase. They brawl to the back. So they're really, trying to heat up very quickly on short build this rematch between the man who loves table, Shingo, and Roderick Strong, which will happen the next night. And that brings us to Jimmy Rave defeated Homicide, scored to the ring by Julius Smokes, in 18 minutes, 6 seconds using an inside cradle. And this was the start of the new Jimmy Rave era. This was the transformation was complete. Like, we saw him, we've talked about this on recent shows, we saw him lose the rest of the parts of the embassy gimmick piece by piece. First, Nana was gone, then Daisy Hayes was gone. I mean, she's still in the company, but no longer part of the embassy. He threw the robe away, he got rid of Savanaro, and then he finally got rid of his embassy theme to something generic. And now, tonight, the transformation is complete, because the most over part of his act, the toilet paper throwing, is now it's now banned. There's a funny moment on commentary where I think Prazak basically says the toilet paper. I don't know if it was Prazak or Gabe, but one of them says toilet paper is banned now at the shows, and then they pause for a second. They're like, no, it's still in the bathrooms, but it's just no, you can't throw it in the ring. For a second they were like, oh sure, people think if they go to a Ring of Honor show they're gonna have to bring a magazine with them, but the other thing that changes with Jimmy's gimmick tonight is he debuts a brand new theme song, which is the Animals classic version of House of the Rising Sun, which is both a great piece of music and I think for wrestling actually a very good, very unique theme song. But this version they use for Jimmy Rave's theme for Ring of Honor has a really weird choice because it opens with a clip of all things, Brad Pitt from Interview with the Vampire, where he goes, "Shall we begin like David Copperfield? I am born. I grew up. Or shall we begin when I was born to darkness, as I call it?" And that is such a overly emo, dramatic quote for Jimmy Rave. That's not like a quote like Jimmy Jacobs would put in front of his promos. It's such a weird thing and it's made me start to think that was kind of a trend, to put a movie quote. Roderick Strong has the Boondock Saints quote in front of his theme at this point, in the mid-aughts as an indie wrestler. And I started thinking, what random out-of-place movie quote would I have to play at the start of my theme if I was a wrestler in this era? And I finally came out with it, Matt. And I'm not going to put you on the spot. You don't have to come up with one. But I know what mine would be, which it would be Don Rickles from the Norm Macdonald classic Dirty Work. And it would just be completely out of context. Before my music starts up, it would be him saying, "I got a call yesterday from Baskin Robbins. They said that they're down to only 5 flavors." And to me, that would start my music, and people would go, "What the fuck was that?" And that would be my out of context thing. So,
Well, this is a concept I have never put any thought into, so I have no idea how I would answer that question. But I will give it some thought and try to have an answer on for the next show.
So, before we get your thoughts first on this match, Matt, I did some more digging for some more of those, I know you love them, juicy tidbits, and I re-listened to clips of an honorable mention, great they did a 2-part podcast with Jimmy Ray, which I always bring up because there are very few Ring of Honor wrestlers who have done shoot interview style interviews, really extended about this era of Ring of Honor and their work in it, and Jimmy's one of them. It's all completely for free on their feed. So, and I always try and use clips often. I don't try and clip every single thing they use, but I try and use it for major things, and I give them a plug. But anyway, there were some interesting things here. First off, he says the House of the Rising Sun theme came from Bryan Danielson. He was in a car with Bryan going to one of the shows, and House of the Rising Sun was on Bryan's music player or whatever in the car, and Bryan basically told him this, you should use this as your new theme. And Jimmy says I decided to do it, and he goes, "I really like the theme because it's slow and methodical like how I wrestle," which I thought was a very self-aware kind of thing of yeah, that's what I've set out to do. And he does not talk about the Brad Pitt quote, unfortunately. I really want to know about that. He also says that Bryan Danielson gave him the heel hook, which is his new finisher that he does not use in this match. But that made me think it's like an interesting thing for wrestlers, like, or sometimes I have ideas where I'm like, I don't have the energy to do this, but I think, I don't know if you could make a whole book out of this, but at least an article or something, I think that would be interesting for people would be like stories of where wrestlers got ideas for moves and angles. Cause I think a lot of us assume that, oh, you see something in wrestling, it's either the booker or the wrestler doing it came up with it. And there's so many little stories like that. Like, oh, no, someone else told me this would be a great idea. Someone else suggested this. Like a big famous one would be like Scott Hall suggested the Crow makeup for Sting. Or at least I don't know if that was ever debunked or if that's true or not. Or like, okay, one that's true would be like Steve Austin getting up the Stone Cold moniker because his wife said, drink your tea before it goes stone cold. And I bet you there's like a million of those that you could really fill out. Something. It was something like I didn't know until I did the research. Like, oh, like that's all from Bryan Danielson apparently. And the last thing I'll say is, Jimmy also had some thoughts about the end of the embassy. He said how it happened was he was on a tour of Dragon Gate when Nana left, and Gabe sent him an email saying, Nana's been fired, the embassy's dead, think up some new ideas. And the boys on an honorable mention asked him, like, did you feel like the embassy had run its course? And he was like, no, like I still had some more ideas. And he said, the big bummer for me was just, he felt like without the embassy, I was like, oh, Sal's going to lose his job here. And obviously, we've been watching the shows. We know that turned out to be exactly true. Like, Sal is gone very quickly after the embassy is ending. But this is kind of supposed to be the debut of a new Jimmy Rave, Matt. What'd you think about it?
Well, I do like the entrance because it's just such a different vibe, kind of just like a much slower song than you normally get, and so different from what Jimmy has presented himself as. And I like that. Like, I remember being live at the show and being like, who could this be? And I was like, Jimmy Rave to this music? Like, it was like very, that's actually the second thing that I actually remember from the show is reacting to that music. So I appreciated that it totally just changed the tone completely. I also like that Jimmy was sort of working differently too. He was, they had banned the toilet paper, like they made it clear, like toilet paper is banned now, we're not using it, and there wasn't any, which I think definitely had run its course. And so he's not doing so much of the over the top fighting with the crowd stuff. Doesn't really stall, doesn't really react as much to the crowd. He's much more focused. I like that. The other thing, by the way, is, I almost think that the other thing that they talk about when when they talk about how toilet paper is banned, both announcers make very clear. They make a special point to point out they do still allow toilet paper in the bathrooms.
So that, like, I just love that they honestly thought that, like, fans might think you might have to be like raw, like Dude Wipes should have sponsored this. We're coming to you right after WrestleMania with Dude Wipes. Like, there will be no more toilet paper. There will be Dude Wipes.
Yeah, no more. But then people would start throwing Dude Wipes into the ring.
Oh God! Someone should do. Matt. It's time for that gimmick to come back with Dude Wipes.
Maybe like at an indie show, they'll pelt. But the problem is, you can get toilet paper extremely cheaply, and you'd have to buy a bunch of Dude Wipes, and I would think that would be a lot more pricey, right?
Yeah.
That's...
And Dude Wipes are not going to fly like toilet paper. They're all soggy.
No, you'd have to throw like a pack of Dude Wipes, which actually which could probably actually hurt somebody. So you know what? We're not endorsing this idea. I'm sorry. It's funny in concept though. It would be a funny reference to wrestling of the past, but don't do it. Somebody will get hurt. You could put somebody's eye out with those Dude Wipes.
That should have been a gimmick when they first came back to wrestling from COVID. Like, everyone has to bring like sanitary wipes and then throw them during the match.
Somebody like blind somebody with hand sanitizer. or since hand sanitizer is made of alcohol, they could use that to pour all over a table so they can make a flaming table. Like hand sanitizer all over the table.
There'd be a great spot if someone pulls out like rubbing alcohol or hand sanitizer and they're going to use it to blind the guy, but then they realize it's like too valuable. Like they could make $60 selling it on eBay. So they're like, you know what? Even if I lose this match, I'm not using this shit.
That's right.
I can't risk it.
Right. Yeah. You should save that stuff because, you never know when another pandemic's going to hit. I don't know. That bird flu looking pretty scary. Anyway, uh, let's not be too morbid. So the other thing they mentioned, which is funny, is, and I feel like they were even sort of tongue in cheek about it. Gabe says this match is happening because ROH doesn't leave things hanging, and at How We Roll back in May, the Rottweilers and the Embassy went to a double disqualification, so they need a resolution here. And at one point, they were even like, "Yeah, at the How We Roll show, right?" And Gabe's like, "I think that's what it was. I hope that's what it was." Like even he doesn't remember. And
To me, that was Gabe. Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
I was gonna say that to me, that was like Gabe at his most charming.
Yeah.
Because like the thing we talked about on the last show, like how the big thing Jim Cornette was missing was like I never felt like he truly lived and breathed the company, even though he was like the figurehead of it. Gabe obviously lived and breathed the company, and you can tell when they bring up the How We Roll at first, and he's like, "Did it happen on that show?" When Prazak brings it up, and then Prazak's not 100% sure. Gabe brings it up later in the match, like it's clear it's bothering him now that he doesn't remember the exact B show that Alex Shelley and Jimmy Ray versus Ricky Reyes and Homicide happened on. The fact that he doesn't know that for sure, you can tell that's kind of eating at him. And I thought that was kind of adorable, like how in it he is.
Yeah, and he is in it for sure. I mean, you know what? That's why we love Gabe. At least that's why we loved him in this era of ROH for sure. But I actually thought the beginning of the match was good because it was like Jimmy was really intense, and the announcers pointed out that Homicide was a little bit nonchalant and not taking the match so seriously. He was sort of having fun with Rave. And, I think that was pretty good foreshadowing for later. As the match went on, I thought it didn't really build that well. I thought it got a little bit awkward. I thought at one point, Rave hit a running knee, and it was like one of the worst knees that he's done. I didn't think that was good. I did enjoy that at one point, Smokes was yelling encouragement at Homicide, and he yelled, "You're a tremendous athlete," which I'm pretty sure I remember him yelling at Low Key at some point too. And I just think that's such a funny thing to yell in the middle of a match at the person that you're managing. But there was another spot where Homicide hit a cutter, and he hit a Tiger Driver for 2. And I was like, that's a pretty rare move for Homicide to hit in ROH. And it was at a pretty high angle. Like, not Osprey level, but definitely higher than like a Gibson driver. So Homicide was busting some stuff out. Because, this match was pretty long. So they got to do a lot of stuff. At one point, Rave went for a superplex, and Homicide hit a middle rope DDT as a counter. Like, that was a really cool move, too. But it got, like, no pop. Like, there was no reaction to that very dangerous-looking, cool move, which surprised me, even for this crowd. When Homicide does the Three Amigos, there's a tribute to Eddie, I was thinking about this because I'm pretty sure at WrestleMania this past weekend, Rhea Ripley did almost like a tribute to Eddie when she went up to the top rope. And I was just thinking about this because obviously, like, this was only a year after Eddie died. Eddie Guerrero. And so it made sense the crowd was really into the tribute spots, the Three Amigos and stuff. How many wrestlers would get like the same like big reaction to tribute spots almost 19 years after they died? Like I was thinking about this, like if to the equivalent would be in 2006, you're talking about a wrestler that had died in like 1987, or if you think about it, even like if you were watching a match in 1994, would there ever possibly be a wrestler who died in like 1976 that would have gotten a reaction from the crowd if you did tribute spots to them? Like, it's crazy to think how long those tribute spots have been around and how the crowd still reacts to them. You know what I mean?
That's a really interesting point. Like thinking about you talking about, like, I can't think of another move, like a tribute move that's been done by as many wrestlers in as many promotions for as long a time. Like all those factors, right? Like the years you mentioned, just that alone is crazy, but like it happens like everywhere, like the indies, like pretty much every promotion, someone has done that, often regularly, and it's always gets a reaction.
And in AEW, Penta still does it, right? Like,
yeah, and it always gets a reaction, and everyone instantly knows what it is all these years later. Yeah, that is really. I don't know if there's another spot that's like that.
Yeah, It's interesting and cool. I think it's really cool actually. Um, but then so the match goes on. At one point, Rave does gonorrhea, and the announcers are both like, "He needs a new name for that." And I don't remember if he ever comes up with one honestly, because I mean I think he's only in ROH really until like the middle of next year. And then he's gone. And he's out a while even during part of that time because he hurts his jaw in a match against McGuinness. But anyway, we'll cross those bridges when they come to it. Homicide at that point hits a very awkward spear-looking thing I wrote, and I don't know what it was supposed to be, and neither do the announcers. And Raves follows up with that crappy knee for two. So that's where I think the match starts to really come down. Besides the fact that they're doing all these moves to no reaction, Homicide hits the top rope Rana and the lariat. Rave ducks and spears him, gets a 2 count. Homicide blocks a lariat and actually hits a Busaiku knee. So he's like busting out all sorts of rare moves. Gets a 2 count. Rave hits the pedigree, gets a 2 count. And then Homicide goes for a suplex, but Rave gets a sudden small package for the clean 3 count. And the crowd chants bullshit, but it was not bullshit. It was a completely clean win. So like overall the match was weird. I thought that the booking was bold. I thought it was brave. And I think it's actually was good booking because of what it sets up later and everything that had been built up for Rave. I don't think it really hurt Homicide in terms of being built up for his big title win. I thought it had promise at the beginning, but got awkward as it went on with the weird moments. And the crowd heat was like 0, which is crazy because like, aren't these two of Ring of Honor's top stars? I can't say they didn't work hard. I like Homicide busting out the new moves, but I don't know. Something about it didn't click for me. Maybe if the crowd was hotter, it would have felt better to me, but they weren't, and it didn't.
So you were wondering, because I've been fairly positive about some of these undercard matches, like when I'm like, oh, it sounds like you like this show more than you're saying. This is where our paths might start to diverge a bit, because you sound mixed on this match. Even you being mixed, I'm decidedly lower on this match than you. I would give this one of my rare below averages, and people that listen to the show know I don't give below average very often on the show. I think Ring of Honor had a really high standard of work. I've talked about this before. I feel like, sometimes wrestlers, particularly if they're in the same promotion for a long time, they do need to switch things up with their character and their style and stuff. But I understand taking away of all the things about Rave that they've taken away, and I actually like how they kind of took them piece by piece. But my thought is, and I've said this before, if you take things away, you have to replace them with things. You can't just take things away without adding things back. And to me, this match was kind of like the zenith example of that. Like, Rave's never been a big personality. He worked as the center of the embassy because he was like the center of the embassy, right? Like, they surrounded him with talkers and a parade of like interesting minions and notable stable mates with big personalities. You had Prince Nana and Alex Shelley, and at different times like Abyss and Daisy Hayes and Summer Nara, like all big personalities, people that could do things during the matches to help kind of add some personality, while he handled kind of like the nuts and bolts wrestling of it. And he also had one of the most fun, even if you were saying like, maybe don't feel quite as strong as you, but I do agree. Yeah, it was trying to run its course, the toilet paper spot, but still was like one of the more fun, successful crowd participation spots of its era, the toilet paper throwing. And on this night, all of that is gone. And the only thing, all that's replaced all of that is he has a good theme song and a weird interview with the vampire quote. And if you watch this match, before Homicide even comes out, like the crowd's chanting for Homicide. You mentioned that, like the crowd dies for this match. I completely agree. But they're hot for Homicide before he comes out. They're hot for their New York hero. And then you watch this match, and over the course of the match, all the energy and life just gets drained from this crowd that I think wants, I agree. Long Island crowds in Ring of Honor are not good in general, but I felt if you listen to the start of this match, they are ready to be pumped for Homicide, and they just start to die. And I think it's because of how these guys work this match. Like, one thing I do disagree with you on this match is I felt like Jimmy Rave didn't change much. Like, I do agree he cut out the bailouts, that the stalling, and I thought that was almost another example of him taking away something that worked for him and not replacing it with something, because sometimes the bailouts weren't good, the Larry Zbyszko type stalling, but sometimes they were fun, and they at least were another thing he was doing that no one else on the roster generally did. And now instead it is just kind of the match starts with just generic mat wrestling. And like you mentioned, like he's still doing all his old moves, like to the point where, like you mentioned, when he does like the gonorrhea and also the greetings from Ghana, both of them, they're like, well, what do we call them now? Like, do we still, and I think at the end of the match, they call it the pedigree, you know, they're just like, okay, I guess it's the pedigree now. I think at least in some promotion, you might call it greetings from Atlanta. I'm not sure. But anyway, we get 5 minutes of mat work to start. And same thing I've said about mat work a lot. I criticize mat work a lot on the show, but I love mat work. I love flashy mat work. I love gritty, tight mat work. I love realistic, amateur-inspired mat work. I love mat work that tells a story. But what I dislike is the mat work we see here, which is 5 minutes of killing time because you have a lot of match time. It's not particularly interesting. It doesn't serve a purpose. Someone is calling me if you hear a thing in the background. So yeah, to me, it's just not particularly interesting mat work. It doesn't serve a purpose even a minute after it ends. It's just there to pad a longest match. It reminds me of when I was first buying Japanese wrestling tapes, like as a young teen in the late 90s. I would buy like 6 or 8 hour tapes of just All Japan and New Japan TV. And obviously the TV had short time slots. So a lot of the matches were edited for time. And I remember sometimes you would see like New Japan, like these great juniors matches. And you'd be like, this is an amazing match, but they cut out like 7 minutes of it. And you were like, man, I bet you the full thing would be would be so much better. And then eventually years later, I would hunt them down. And sometimes it would be, but a lot of times what I would realize is no, like they cut out 5 minutes of mat work at the start that meant absolutely nothing. And that's what this felt like. Like you just that mat work at the start, just complete padding. And then from there, this I thought was a very lazily mid-tempo match. Like there is some action, they hit some of their usual stuff, but it's nothing you haven't seen before. None of it's done in an interesting way to me. And the most memorable spots were either botches or near botches. Like Jimmy looks like he almost gets dumped on his head on a belly-to-belly suplex. And then later you had what you mentioned where Homicide does that, basically that Tiger Driver kind of double underhook power bomb that he rarely ever does. And he doesn't get Jimmy very high. And like you mentioned, that looked kind of scary to me. Like that could have gone if he rotated just a little bit differently. Really bad for Jimmy. There's a weird spot later where Homicide and Jimmy collide. And it seems like one or both of them likely didn't expect the other to do whatever they were or weren't doing. It's not like a botch heavy match, but in a match that really didn't have a lot to like grab my attention, that stuff kind of stuck with me. And then there's the finish. And I agree with you. I think Jimmy winning is smart booking. Like it's classic wrestling booking 101, right? Where you know somebody is going to become champ in a couple months, in this case, Homicide. And so you have him do 1 or 2 clean jobs before he becomes champ, because then when he becomes champ, he has like ready-made challengers right there that can say, hey, I just beat you clean. And also with Jimmy on a losing streak, it's a great way to end the losing streak really emphatically, where he wins clean against like the hottest guy in the promotion who's everyone knows he's on his way to winning the world title. And like the idea that he wins out of nowhere. The one thing I didn't like about it was the Gabe a couple things, but I didn't like the Gabe commentary because it was the classic part of Gabe that I don't like. You know, I do agree. I like some of the Gabe commentary. There's some charm to it. And we talked about like the charming part of Gabe in this match, but then there's the part where he telegraphs everything by going so far in the opposite direction. And it's like, in a way, I get like he sells the story of this match as like, you know, Jimmy's the real underdog. No one expects him to win. And, you know, Homicide's the favorite. And that if this was real, if this was kayfabe, that's the story you would be telling, because Homicide is on a hot streak and Jimmy Rave's on a long losing streak. But the way he just keeps selling it, it was like, this is one match. If I was watching this, like if this was aired on a live pay-per-view, I would have known 5 to 10 minutes before the match ended that like Jimmy Rave is winning this match, because Gabe keeps pushing in the other way so hard. You know, Jimmy's going to win this thing. And then the final thing I would say is, like, the end I didn't like, in the sense of, like, the match is kind of getting bigger in the sense that Rave hits the pedigree and Homicide kicks out, but the match as a whole doesn't really feel like it's getting, like, really fast-paced or hot or exciting. And then Homicide just goes, like, right after taking the pedigree for what looks like a standard vertical suplex, and Jimmy just reverses it to an inside cradle, and it's a very flat, another finish on the show where fans aren't expecting it. And I just felt like I like that Jimmy won. I just felt like there's so many better ways you could have done this. Like, we've seen Bryan Danielson in 2006 do these great small package wins where he's getting his ass kicked and then he gets the win with a small package out of desperation. You could have done something like that. You could have had a match, but instead you have a match here where like Jimmy's largely in control, doesn't feel in danger, and it's not really getting exciting, and he just pulls it out. You could have had Jimmy cheat to get heel heat. It would have, made him a little less credible, but gotten more heat. You could have even done a really ballsy, maybe a little bit risky thing where you could have had Jimmy kind of just like really emphatically beat Homicide, where instead of like a roll up, just have him put him down with like a pedigree or something real clean, hit a few moves real dominantly at the end. And instead you get this really kind of flat, out of nowhere finish. And I will just say I thought this match was below average. I really did not like this match.
And the one thing, I mean, I already kind of gave my thoughts on the match, so I won't do that. But the one thing I will say that I felt very strongly differently from you about is I do like the new version of Rave. Like, I think that the subtraction works. I think the more minimalist approach was cool. Like, we'll see how it develops, obviously, and obviously he doesn't do it for that long, but I actually liked that aspect of it. So I think that also could make a difference in how we saw the match. I mean, I didn't like the match that much more than you, but I do think I liked that a lot more than you.
Yeah, I think you did a good job kind of narrowing down our difference because, like, to me, it was almost it wasn't almost. For me, it was too minimalist. Like,
Yeah.
And I'm a guy like Jimmy Rave was a divisive wrestler because some people thought, some people, especially like in his Southern Indie run, thought him as like a god of wrestling and, like this guy who does all the little things and intangibles and is like a secret amazing wrestler. And then some people always hated Jimmy Rave. And I'm always more in the middle where Jimmy Rave for me has always been a guy where like he straddles the line. And when he gets the balance right for my taste, when he's just a little bit on the right side of that minimalist line, I really like him. I feel like, oh, he is a guy who does a lot of the little things and kind of is unheralded and knows those intangibles and stuff. But then there are matches like, to me, like this one where he goes a little too far, where then I'm almost on the other end, where I'm like, this is too much even for me. Like, I mean, too little even for me. This, but again, I think Jimmy Rave's one of those guys. A lot of people disagree, but like, there's lots of varying opinions. But right after the match, the Briscoes run in to attack Homicide. Julie Smokes tries to help him, but the Briscoes attack him too. Samoa Joe's music hits, and he runs to immediately start our semi-main event. Samoa Joe defeated Jay Briscoe via pinfall in 11:58 after he hit the Muscle Buster. This is the kind of the quality of Samoa Joe matches we've been seeing in ROH lately, but I felt like we got to this level of quality in a little bit of a different way than some of those other recent matches. Like lately in Ring of Honor, we've been seeing a lot of Samoa Joe matches where he's in a multi-man or a tag, and he comes in and he just hits a few flurries where, he's working hard when he's in, but he's not doing much. Where in this match, it's a 12-minute singles match, and physically, he's giving quite a bit. Like I felt like he's working pretty hard, and he's working a full 12-minute singles match where there's nowhere to hide or take a break. But I felt like in terms of just, there's no ambition or inventiveness to this match. Like, Joe takes it to Jay immediately for the first few minutes. It's fun to see Joe kick ass, but pretty much everything you see in this match is boilerplate Samoa Joe. Like, it's just right now he is totally in Ring of Honor at this point. He just plays the hits. He doesn't do anything else. Like, mentally, I feel like in this match especially, he is like on complete autopilot. And then Jay makes his comeback, and again, there's some energy to it that I liked, but it's really just basic. Like, it's entertaining in the moment, but it's simultaneously like instantly forgettable. And there were only like 3 little moments that really stood out to me. I really liked Joe doing a couple big flying kicks. Like, I always like when he does the enziguri in the corner when the opponent's standing on the top turnbuckle and he has to aim higher. I like that. I like the big kick he does out of the midair when Jay is flying through the air on a springboard, how that sets up, like, he goes right to the finish off of that. And I also like Joe going up for suplexes. He goes up for one suplex here. I always bring this up because Joe goes up really heavy in a way that makes them look really brutal and like a real accomplishment. And Joe doesn't go up for suplexes in a lot of his matches. So whenever you see them, it's always like a little bit of a treat. He takes one here, and they always feel kind of substantial. But my favorite spot in the match was the spot Jay does all the time, which is his Death Valley driver. Like, the crazy thing is, it's not even like the best version he's done of it. Normally he does the gorilla press where he's holding the guy in a gorilla press and he drops him onto his shoulders and instantly does the Death Valley driver. And it's a great looking spot. obviously, like, Joe is a larger man. He can't really do that. So he has to take like an extra second, and even has like a bit of a hiccup. I don't know if it's intentional or not, lifting Joe up. And his Death Valley Driver, when he hits it, doesn't look the same. But to me, it made it better. Like, it made it seeming like so much more of a struggle, made when it hit feel like a bigger deal than his normal one. And the crowd popped big for it. And I think they popped bigger for it than if he had just done his very clean, flashier one. And it kind of reminded me that, like, in wrestling has moved so much farther in the direction of do as many moves per minute as clean as they can be done. And there's some, I think that's appropriate for some matches. In some ways, it's improved wrestling. But I do wish there was a little bit more of the struggle in some matches. Not every match, but in some. And just that moment kind of reminded me of, like, I wish there was a bit more of the struggle. I wish things hit a little uglier sometimes. So often now matches are just, like, so clean. Overall, I'd give this like a good, like a 3.25 stars. So overall, that's not a bad match, but I'm disappointed in the sense that this is, like the commentators point out, the first Jay Briscoe versus Samoa Joe singles match since their cage match in 2004. And that was such a fantastic, memorable spectacle of a match. I wish this match felt like a bigger deal in the build and was worked like a bigger deal in the match. And instead, it's worked like what it is, which is it's a B-show kind of toss-away match that's just there to extend a tag feud. Like, it doesn't feel like, oh, we've really built to Joe and Jay are going to go at it one-on-one for the first time in 2 years. It's just like, oh, Homicide and Joe are feuding with the Briscoes. These guys are going to wrestle again tomorrow. We got to do something with them tonight. How about a 12-minute singles match? And it was a very B-level, Joe-level performance. So that's what I thought about the match.
Yeah, we're on the same page about this one. I think the quality was similar. I think, Joe was very fun to watch. He had energy. The crowd was hot for him. One of the hotter matches of the night. And also that couldn't touch their previous matches because there was no real story, had an abrupt ending. They didn't really try to do anything ambitious with it. They just were like, we're going to be athletic and do our stuff and it'll be fun because we're good and they have good chemistry. So it's I feel like it's almost impossible for the two of these guys not to have a good match with each other, but it's still disappointing because like you said, the stakes felt much lower given the history and given the current feud. Jay always works his ass off and Joe was having fun, so it was easy to enjoy, but it was hard to really appreciate like on a deeper level because you just know how much better they could be with each other. And I guess that's just the way it is with Joe now in ROH, it's never going to be in this era as good as it possibly could be. And every time you see it, it's like, all right, well, it's not something that I want to accept, but it's something that you have to accept. That's just how it is. And he's still good. He's just not peak Joe in ROH during this time. I think Jay probably would have been game to be peak Jay if Joe was up for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's just how it is. The other thing is, I noticed another chant that made me say, okay, yep, this is a TNA crowd. And there was a fuck Kurt Angle chant. And because Joe was feuding with Angle in TNA, and I think a lot of ROH crowds would just ignore that and be like, who cares? Like, we're watching ROH. But this crowd definitely made sure to mention Austin Aries and his role in TNA and Samoa Joe and his feud in TNA. So I guess Gabe willed it to be true. Long Island, a TNA crowd. They might as well bring Christian Cage back there.
And that chant was a good reminder for me of like, oh, of course, this is why Joe's starting to like put a little less thought and effort into some of these matches because like he was popping off in like a big way in TNA at this point, right?
Oh,
like
yeah,
the Kurt Angle feud is huge.
The Kurt Angle feud was the biggest feud ever in TNA at that point. So
yeah, it was literally like the first match they wrestled on pay-per-view was the biggest buy rate in TNA history, and I think that record. I don't know if people were saying like the return of the TNA moniker this year might have helped. Made a buy rate to rival it, but at least until this year, it stood as like the biggest buy rate TNA. And think of all the pay-per-views they run with all the stars. Like this was kind of, in some ways, that's like one of Joe's best kind of. If you're trying to debate him for like a Hall of Fame or something, that's one of his better like drawing accomplishments. That like look at all the big stars TNA booked, and my first match with Kurt Angle. More people actually decide to buy a show for that than anything else TNA ever put on.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
And that brings us to, we get an ad for FIP's second year spectacular night 2. And like usual, I continue to not get this. They just show wrestlers making entrances and talking on the mic. You don't see a single spot. You don't know what the matches are or anything. All you know from this clip is it's a wrestling show with Roderick Strong, the Briscoes, and Delirious on it. That's it. And like, to me, it's like, how many DVDs do you think that sold? Like, I don't think any. But, that brings us to our main event. Christopher Daniels and Matt Sydal, with Allison Danger in their corner, defeated Davey Richards and Delirious in 26 minutes, 47 seconds, when Sydal pinned Delirious after Daniels hit the best moonsault ever, and then Sydal hit the Sydal press, shooting star press. This match was for a shot at the tag titles the next night, and you might be asking why a match for the number one contendership for the tag titles is main eventing over a match earlier in the night that actually was for the tag titles. Well, it's one of those things where obviously in kayfabe it makes no sense, but in reality I have to assume it's because Gabe didn't want to end a show with like a bummer heel victory off a cheap interference finish. So he's like, okay.
But this is definitely how you know this is a B show, when you're ending it with a number one contenders match for the tag team titles.
Including one of those teams completely thrown together. Like, I don't think Davey Richards and Delirious had ever been a strict tag team ever before in Ring of Honor.
Well,
and
the show right before this one was the only time.
Okay. See, Matt, I've been trying to block that show out of my memory for a long time. But they got a shitload of time and the main event spot. So what'd you think about that? I mean, that is kind of in some ways the most interesting thing about this match, right? Like, that they're getting this much of an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I have to think that I like this match more than you, given your overall thoughts on the show. I thought this was really good. I think it probably could have stood to lose like about 8 minutes, maybe. But I thought this was just basically what you would expect from an ROH B show main event, where the two teams didn't really have a story. They were both baby faces, and they were just told, go out there and be athletic and do impressive stuff. And that's what they did. And so if you're looking for like something deep and emotional and, inventive, you're not going to get that here. If you're looking for 2006 indie tag team wrestling done at a high level, where they have a lot of cool moves and they ratchet up the bumps and the near falls near the end, you're going to get that with this match. And that was fine for me here. I didn't need anything more from this match than that. And like I said, this was the one thing I did really remember from the show, especially the spot near the end. I still have that picture in my mind of Sydal having Delirious on the top rope and going for the moonsault belly to belly, but Richards from behind running up the ropes and hitting a top rope German suplex on Sydal, where Sydal does the flip bump. That's like the one like memory, like snapshot that I have in my mind from this show. And, that spot held up really well from my memory. So a couple, like, before I get to, like, the match and stuff, one thing that I noticed, and, like, this is a totally random thought that I had, so I'm sure it's not really interesting to anyone but me, but, so Sydal came out, and he was wearing, like, a hoodie, like a hooded sweatshirt, a zip-up hooded sweatshirt. And I was thinking, you see other wrestlers do that. Bryan Danielson does that now. CM Punk did it at times, a lot, I guess maybe most of the time. Before the year 2000, did wrestlers ever come to the ring wearing a zip-up hooded sweatshirt? Like, I feel like that was just not the sort of thing a wrestler would wear because it was just too casual. I know that's a random question, but what do you think?
I don't know. I don't think so. My only caveat there is I think if you would have seen it a fair bit, it would have been like very early, like mid, like to late 90s indie wrestling that I haven't seen a lot of.
Yeah, and maybe
it wouldn't be in the promotions
ECW
that we
too.
watched.
Yeah, maybe some ECW too, but I can't think of ECW wrestlers who would come out in that. So I don't know. It just shows like the more casual nature of wrestling as we got into the 2000s. Like there was less of a need to seem like a a big like fancy guy wearing the suits and stuff. It's like, oh, I'm just gonna come to the ring wearing a zip up sweatshirt, like I don't know, I'm just some dude hanging out on the street. And that's
also the economy of U.S. indie wrestling, where it's like getting special gear just for your entrance made. There's probably some wrestlers that are just like, you know what? I'd like to make rent this month, so I'm not going to splurge and buy like the really nice like fitted jacket with my name embroidered on the back or things like that. I imagine
Yeah.
I'm just going to wear my winter casual hoodie.
Well, that was also something that, Punk definitely did, was just wear the casual stuff to the ring. But I think Seidel, there was something on the back of the sweatshirt. Maybe it was a Dragon Gate hoodie. I don't know. I mean, obviously ROH sold hoodies, but I think those are the like over the top ones and not the zip ups. I don't know. Anyway, I was just thinking about that. I was just like, oh, wrestlers just were dressing differently at this point. But anyway, as far as the match, Allison Danger is dressed like a cheerleader again. I guess that'll just be her thing for a while. And the other thing was, as they were running down some of the matches like that Seidel and Delirious had that year, Gabe mentions like, oh, you got to watch that show stealer match from Survival of the Fittest last month. And two things about that comment. One is, can you be a show stealer when you're in the main event? I feel like I don't think you can. And the other thing is the fact that Gabe mentions that Survival of the Fittest was last month makes me think like, man, we really go slow on this show because we reviewed that a long time ago, right? Like that was a while ago, and it was just the month before this. Doesn't that feel like a long time ago?
Yeah, it feels like a million years ago, and like it's also crazy that it's like that's like two. Like I was like, is that two Seidel Delirious matches ago or 20? Like it seems now at like this point like they've had 19, which obviously is not true, but.
Yeah, so this is April 9th that we're recording this, and we reviewed Survival of the Fittest on December 10th. So that is 4 months ago that we reviewed this. So just letting you know when they say last month, we multiply whatever it is times 4, and that's how long we're taking to get through things. Gabe also notes this is the first time Daniels and Richards have faced off, which is, that's noteworthy. And as just to kind of emphasize that, as you pointed out to me, there was a spot at the very beginning where they're doing arm drags, and then Richards comes up and kicks the crap out of Daniels, and then he arm drags him again, and he yells, "Get up, old man," so he can arm drag him. So Daniels was 36 here, for the record, 4 years younger than I am now. Almost 5 years younger than I am now. So, not only do we go slow on this, but our life is moving too fast. Those are two things that are true. Then Gabe talks about Seidel's big matches that he's had, like against Kenta, against Aries, and he says, but that elusive win has always eluded him, which is definitely something that elusive things do. Elusive things tend to elude. That's sort of what makes them elusive. Anyway, so they have their basic wrestling early. I love the bump that Delirious takes on Seidel's monkey flip. He gets like really good air and like he picks his head up right before tucking. I definitely like enjoy that style of monkey flip bump. They go at a pretty fast pace for a good few minutes. Finally, the match slows down with Daniels getting a chin lock, and Seidel gets Richards in a head scissors on the mat, and Danger and the crowd have a dueling chant, which I've never seen before, where she yells tap, and they yell no, and they do that repeatedly. I don't think I've ever seen a manager and the crowd have a dueling chant before.
And it sounded like she was blowing her voice out, like trying to fight the entire crowd.
Yeah, it was funny. Richards, he's making a comeback on his own with kicks and then drops Seidel's abdomen over the top rope, and Delirious comes in for an early, like almost like hot-ish tag. He's a House of Fire. So that at one point, Delirious puts the Cobra Clutch on Seidel, and Seidel fights out. So Delirious like releases him aggressively, and Seidel like spins out of the Cobra Clutch into this weird spinning flip bump, which I enjoyed. So they were doing some novel stuff. Daniels at one point, Uranagi, Delirious onto Richards' back. That was cool. I also like the spot where Delirious cuts off. So Daniels is going for an iconoclasm on Richards, and Delirious cuts him off and then does the never-ending story clothesline while Richards is still on the top rope. And then Richards immediately hits Daniels with what they called a frog crossbody, like a tucking crossbody, and Gabe says he's never seen that before. Have you ever seen that before, Trevor?
I might have not before this match, but I might have seen Davey Richards actually do this later on. But like, I think that's a really cool move. Like,
It is.
what do you like?
You were
I think that's
you
cool.
were about to say I might have seen it in the future, which was a very eerie kind of thing to say. Like, tell me more about the future, Trevor.
Oh, it's not good.
I guess that's not surprising. Um, did you know that the Richards move where he throws the guy up and then comes down with a kick is called the alarm clock? Because that's what Gabe called it here, and I
Yeah,
don't
that's
think I'm.
always like. Is it just because like
It, wait,
is his legs
it
supposed to be
wakes you
like
up.
the arms of a clock?
It wakes you up.
Or wouldn't most wrestling moves wake you up? Like I don't know.
You mean if you were in bed and somebody just did like a regular ass elbow drop to you, you could keep sleeping through that. You know, that's not
like
an alarm
Matt,
clock.
I just realized there's literally one move in wrestling that wouldn't wake you up to the point that they give it a special name
Called
to enforce.
And it's extremely similar to the alarm clock.
Actually, I guess the sleeper hold and the go to sleep.
Yeah,
There's two moves that put you to sleep.
But isn't the go to sleep and similar to the alarm clock because they both end up like dropping a guy down into a kick or a knee? Maybe that's why he calls it the alarm clock because it's like the opposite of the go to sleep. Actually, that makes a lot of sense because he's Kenta's protege.
We just figured it out.
Genius.
We're geniuses.
We are geniuses.
Oh.
So there was also a spot where Seidel and Daniels put simultaneous Koji clutches on their opponents, which I enjoyed. And then, the match keeps going. I think it's very entertaining, honestly, the whole way. In my opinion, again, it doesn't really have that much to say, which is, I know, a weird thing to say about a wrestling match. Like there's not a lot of depth to it, I guess is what I would say. But they keep it moving. I don't think it ever really gets boring, even though it is a little bit too long. But they get into their sequence of big moves at the end. They hit a DDT combo where Seidel's legs are on Richard's shoulders and Delirious hits like a spike DDT for a 2 count. Daniels Arabian presses Richards, who's on the floor, and then in the ring, Delirious hits the panic attack on Seidel. Seidel goes for that moonsault belly to belly, but Delirious blocks it. And this is the spot I was talking about where Richards runs up and hits him with a release German suplex off the top, and Seidel takes the flip bump. And then Delirious immediately follows that with Shadows Over Hell onto Seidel, but Daniels breaks that up. And then Richards and Daniels go at it, and Richards hits the handspring kick and then does this wild dive onto the floor, which I always love. And then Delirious does that neck breaker on Seidel, where Seidel's legs are dangling over the top rope. And then he locks in the Cobra clutch, but Seidel rams him into the corner, breaks free. And then Delirious says he's going for the moonsault belly to belly, but Seidel fights it off, knocks him down into Daniels, who Uranagis him, hits the best moonsault ever. Seidel immediately follows from the same turnbuckle with the shooting star press, gets the win. It doesn't hit like really great heights to, where it's like this great match, but I thought a pretty exciting match the whole way through. Back and forth athletic stuff. I'd say very good main event and kind of like the low end of what you want from ROH, where it's just like, it's wrestling. There's no bullshit. They show what they can do. They have no restrictions. They just go out there and have a great match or a really good match, and they deliver on that. If you want something more than that, you're not going to get it here. But I think that this was, I'd say this is like on the good end of what you would expect from these two teams, and they go more all out than in a lot of recent ROH matches. So I appreciated it, especially considering they had to main event a B show on Long Island. I think they did a good job.
So first thing I would say, Matt, is I was just thinking, I did listen to everything you said, but I was also thinking, so after our discussion, Kenta does the go to sleep. Davey Richards does like the kick more of the midsection of the alarm clock. If you did like a delayed go to sleep where you held the guy on his shoulders for 5 minutes before you hit it, would that be the snooze button? I save that for this moment. It's not worth it.
I'm going to say yes.
Okay. So, as you correctly guessed, Matt, I did not like this match as much as you. I would say I'm like one level below. If you said this was very good, I'd say this is pretty good, like just good. And I think the reason is kind of like you described why. Like you were like, this is like a generic like high energy, for kind of style of the times indie wrestling tag match, and with nothing else to it, and I kind of want a little bit of something else. Like sometimes on a show on through the years, I'll criticize a match as being like the mid-card version of a main event match. And when I say that, what I usually mean is it's like a match that looks great on paper, but because it was put on like the mid-card, it's been scaled back in ways like it's probably gotten less time. They're doing less near falls. They're doing less big. They're holding back some of their big stuff. This match to me felt like the opposite. This felt like a mid-card match that was stretched long and scaled up to be a main event. Like I could really feel that. And, like there's no real story to this match other than it being for a tag title shot and it being the 165th chapter in the Matt Sydal Delirious rivalry, which they are leaning so heavy into recently. The effort level and action in this match is consistently fairly high. Like, to me, this match almost always feels like it's like a 6.5 out of 10, but it doesn't build to a great peak for me personally. Like, they do hit some bigger moves, but you said this match could be like 8 or so minutes shorter. I felt that a lot too. Like, I just felt like this match did not justify the time. Like, they got almost 27 minutes. You could do in the main event slot, you could do basically anything you want. And I just feel like what they did you felt like they did a good job being the main event. I kind of wanted something a bit more memorable more than just like generically good. And, it's a match that kind of hums. Like, I would say most of this match, I would say was like a 3-star level for me. And then the final few minutes, got up to like a 3.5. And so I'd average it out to like 3.25, strong 3.25. I don't know. But I did not enjoy this, for example, as much as the Kings of Wrestling match, where I would say like the start of the Kings of Wrestling tag tonight was worse than any point of this match in terms of entertainment value. But the final 6 or 7 minutes of that match were better by far than I felt like anything in this match. And that match did not overstay. Did not take so much. It made its point quicker, I would say. And I guess one frustrating thing to me would be at the start of the match, you do get something that could have added like that interesting character bit to this match, because there's a sequence very early on I really liked where Davey Richards and Christopher Daniels are being dicks to each other. And as you pointed out, commentary pointed out, this is the first time Davey Richards and Daniels have ever faced off. And they could have mentioned this too. Christopher Daniels, the Super 8 tournament, one of the early indie wrestling tournaments, Daniels was at this point the only 2-time winner. In fact, until this year, he was the only ever 2-time winner. Darius Carter's now won it twice, but Daniels had won it in 2004, and Davey had just won it in 2006 when this happened. So you could have even built up like that, like, oh, 2 of the Super 8 winners facing off. And I thought they had some good chemistry early because Davey calls him an old man, and they have this really fun sequence where Daniels takes some kicks but then avoids some, and then Daniels goes for enziguri and Davey avoids that. And there's this interesting dynamic between, like, you got this young meathead Davey Richards that just loves to bulldoze guys and kick them hard, and then you have Daniels, who's this very smooth guy that likes to probably avoid that kind of stuff. It almost has a little bit of shadows of like the low key Christopher Daniels stuff, which was like one of the original Ring of Honor feuds. And even later on in the match, when Davey gets back with Daniels, he all of a sudden just goes, enough of this nice shit. And he just starts kicking the shit out of Daniels. But like, other than that sequence, they don't really ever come back to that thread. Like, they don't really show personality like that. And I was just like, man, I would have loved if you just threaded something like that throughout this match. That would have made so much of a difference to me, just keeping me at like that extra level of engaged. Like for a while after that first sequence, I was like, I want to see Christopher Daniels versus Davey Richards. And I was like, at this point in my rewatch, I don't want to see any Christopher Daniels singles match in 2006. And after that first sequence, I was like, I want to see these two guys wrestle. And then I kind of lost that feeling. But yeah, there were a bunch of, there's a lot of tags. There's some situation I would describe as kind of hot taggy, but they never build the heat on anyone so much that it gets super dramatic or really satisfying. But there are all the standout spots you mentioned, like Daniels Uranogging Richards onto onto the other guy's back, Davey with the frog crossbody. Davey basically did something that's kind of like halfway between a Steiner screwdriver and a Falcon arrow. That crazy insanely good double team DDT Delirious and Davey do, where they have their opponent elevated on their shoulders and then drop it down to a DDT that just spikes the guy. The top rope German called out as like being a really memorable spot. And it's fun. Matt, did you say that this match you thought could be 8 minutes shorter?
Yes.
Because I looked at my notes. I wrote my notes as I was watching this match. A match of this quality would be better if it was 8 minutes shorter. So we said the exact same amount of minutes of what we could have picked. So that's interesting. But yeah, I thought that like if this match was 8 minutes shorter on the mid card, I'd be really happy with it. I kind of wanted one other element. Like the effort level is not missing. I just kind of wish there was one other element in this match than just that kind of generic hard work and indie main event. The other notable thing for me was Daniels always does that entrance where he stands on a chair in every corner of the ring at ringside when he makes his entrance. He actually slipped on a chair. I was like, man, that's gotta be weird to like something you do all the time and you like slip on it. But that was your main event.
Yeah, but I have a feeling like if you or I did that, if it's like, but I do that all the time. What went wrong? Am I dying? You know, like we would have an existential crisis if we mess something like that up.
Yeah, I'd be having a panic attack for like the next 7 minutes of the match. But afterwards, we go backstage to the final segment, something we alluded on earlier, where Lacey is backstage, and guess what she's doing? She's berating Jamie Jacobs for losing. Jimmy's in a ratty gray sweater, and combined with his haircut, he looks faintly like Kurt Cobain at this point. I was like very Kurt Cobain unplugged vibes at this point. Lacey points out that she won, so at least someone on this team knows how to win, and you don't know how to win clearly. And then she goes, I don't even care that you pinned BJ Whitmer tonight. I wanted you to cripple him, not pin him. And then she tells Jimmy, win a match. She walks away, and then the camera zooms in on a very sad Jimmy as he whispers, but I love you. And I think, Matt, I know what you're going to say because you were touching on it earlier. This feels like we've seen this exact segment
like 50
2 or 3 times.
Yeah, like 50 times, right? Like this exact thing. And she's like, you need to be. First of all, she says, I want you to win, but then she says, I don't care if you win. I want you to cripple him. So it's like, I mean, part of that is just nothing is good enough for Lacey. But yeah, we're sick of the puppy dog Jimmy being like, but I love you. Move on with the story. I know that they will soon. So that's my, that's my little lifeline of hope that they're going to eventually, within the next couple months, which means the next 6 months of this show, they're going to advance things a little bit more.
Yeah, it's one of those things we've seen. I think that's come up as like a common thing in Ring of Honor where a lot of their best storylines, they will kind of overstay their welcome just a bit where they will hit like the same point just a couple shows at least too long. And we've definitely hit that point here where it's like, okay, like, yeah, it's time to move on. You've made this point enough, like change phases. And, but that brings us to the end of the show. And Matt, it is time for the Matt F Trophy.
Yeah, so you mentioned in your review of the main event that you liked the Aries and Strong versus Kings of Wrestling match better. And while I don't think that's true for myself, I do think it definitely peaked a lot higher. And I credit that mostly to Austin Aries and his really awesome comeback and a lot of his, really explosive moves. And I would like to give him the Matt F Trophy for this show because I thought he was the best individual wrestling performer on the show tonight. And, just really remind you why he was always so great and during this era. So Austin Aries, congratulations on winning the Matt F Trophy.
And that brings us to plugs. So as always,
I will say this: I did not give my absolute final thoughts on this show.
Wait! I completely forgot. Matt, I don't know how. Now, this is what happens when we do on Tuesday. That is literally a bedrock part of the show that I don't think I've ever forgotten. 126 episodes. I forgot to give our goddamn final thoughts on the show. Matt, what did you think about the show? And then I can say, geez, what the hell did I do there?
You see what I mean by existential crisis?
Exactly.
When you make one little mistake. I definitely liked the show more than you. Remember last month, last show, I should say, you mentioned that this show was rated almost as low as The Bitter End, and they were not even in the same universe. This was so much better than that one. That one just was just had so many terrible things about it, you know, like just the worst of the ROH booking, the worst ROH crowd, some really disappointing matches. This, like you mentioned, felt like a weight had been lifted off of it because of that, the end of the Cornette angle, and that was like an albatross bringing down ROH for so long. And this just felt like an ROH show again. And that was nice. Like the crowd was not hot for the show, but I feel like there wasn't this like pall of like just absolute like utter disinterest as there was on some of the recent shows, most notably being Hell Freezes Over. I mean not Hell Freezes Over. The Bitter End. And this one just, you know, it felt like the vibes were better. I liked the matches a little bit more than you did. You know, not I don't think so much more than you did, but a little bit. And I think this was a perfectly fine and enjoyable B show. And as such, nothing that anyone ever needs to see, but an enjoyable watch. I didn't feel like, oh God, when am I going to get through this? Like I was enjoying it. I thought it accomplished some things well. And despite a couple of disappointing matches, I think overall stands out as a fairly average show, which is a big step up from the last show and a couple of the shows that we had to watch in October as well.
Yeah, I did like the show less than you. I would say I definitely enjoyed it more than the Bitter End, and I think having actually directly following the Bitter End increased my enjoyment of the show because I was so appreciative that the Black Cloud was gone and just that we were getting something that felt a little bit different. I did like some undercard matches that overachieved, but this B show felt so much like a B show. It felt so uneventful. It felt so skippable. Even though there was a lot of stuff that was fairly entertaining, I felt like nothing apart from like the final 6 or 7 minutes of the tag title match ever got me like even close to like, this is really, really good. There was just a lot of, oh, this is good. This is okay.
And like I said, this is the show of all the shows I ever went to live. This is the one that I remembered the least about. So definitely a B show in that regard.
So to me, I would put this as like not a painful watch, but definitely in the bottom 10% of shows we've ever covered on through the years. But again, you know, if you want to increase your enjoyment of this, force yourself to watch The Bitter End before this, because I think that will make you like the show like at least 20% more. But that brings us to plugs. Through the years at gmail.com is our email, ThROH for through. If you ever have any thoughts, at Trevor Game on Twitter, at Mayor MGF on Twitter. And next time on the show, we will be covering the second half of this double shot. We will be covering the show called Dethroned, which there is one Ring of Honor title match on that show. It's for the tag titles, and all four of them are on the cover of the box, and the show is called Dethroned. So I wonder what's going to happen on that show.
Yeah. You always love shows that give away what's going to happen in the title.
Yeah, but also, you know, the Homicide and Joe versus Briscoe's feud comes to a head with I think the feud ending, kind of another no DQ elimination tag match.
Yeah, elimination this time.
BJ Whitmer and Jimmy Jacobs renew their rivalry. So, you know, there'll be stuff to see and there'll be stuff to talk about. And we are on the march now. We have like 5 shows till the end of the year. So we are in the countdown range now till all the fun stuff, final battle, all the lists and the recap of the year. So it should be fun. And until then, until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.